Hello, everyone. My name is Brian, and welcome back to Barb's Basement. I'm going to be joined by Tad Larkin in his squeaky chair, and
Sorry.
no, you're
God
good.
damn it.
And my friend, he told me how to pronounce his name, Zezene. Zezene?
That's right.
Okay, we're just going to say that I pronounced that correctly. But so I was looped in to this larger conversation that I was having with my good friend Skooma Joe here, the #1 basement boy to ever live. So he was telling me about his friend that he had, who was actually the first person to get this footage of a previously canceled Lucasfilm television show called. Was the working title Star Wars Underworld, or was that supposed to be the actual name of the show? Because sometimes they have like working titles, like for things like, you know, like the first Star Wars movie was called Blue Harvest, I think, like on their production sheets. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, it was the working title.
And sorry, I'm having a Topo Chico seltzer. It's been a long day, so. But yes, I figured we would go over some of like the brief history of it and stuff like that. But I'm gonna really quickly pop it up here as a little dude for us to share on the screen here. Let's bring this guy up, and I'm just gonna let this play like on a loop in the background here. But Tad was very excited when I told him that this was the gentleman that had actually released his footage first. And he's like, wait, we should probably like save this for the actual podcast itself. But I'm just going to call you X. Would you kind of like walk us through how you stumbled upon this footage?
Quite unexpectedly. So, I mean, the way that this worked out was it was the end of 2019, early 2020. And I was kind of hanging around some Star Wars communities, and I think I was in the Star Wars Expanded Universe Discord for the subreddit. And there was I think he was a previous moderator there. Maybe name was Vid, not Joe. I think it was Vid 97 or something. This person who he said that he had come across this background footage. So in the second half of the video that I put on YouTube, there is this behind the scenes footage of how they actually made this test footage. He had found that. So he had found the second half. And in that second half, when they're showing the blue screens and so on, in the bottom left-hand corner, you can see the final render, which we're watching right now. You can see the final render in that bottom corner. And so at the time, that was
where you could actually see the footage on their camera here.
Yes. Yeah, and so you can see that right there. And so the second, he just said, I suspect this is Underworld. And I knew what Underworld was. And so when I looked at this, I had seen the concept art, and I immediately knew this is Underworld. And so I worked a little bit to try to blow up that tiny portion. I tried to blow it up. Yeah, I tried to blow up that tiny portion into a larger video, but the quality was terrible, obviously, doing that. And so I kind of was desperate. I was looking through, and I said, well, where'd you find this? And he said, well, I found it in the Vimeo page of Stargate Studios. And so I kind of did some research. Stargate Studios, you know, they do production work for so many television shows, you know, the Orville and all these other shows. And stuff you would never notice. So, for instance, even daytime television shows are like CSI, like they will do CGI that you don't know is CGI. People walking in the background of a street or something like that. It's just them not creating the people, but putting in stuff that's not in the scene. And so some of that stuff they're actually doing live render, which here you can see. So, sometimes if you catch the cameras, they're actually doing live render as they're shooting this. It's rendering it as they shoot it, which is insane. But so anyway, I researched that in their Vimeo page. It had all this info, and that's when I found this video. I had asked another person, could you look through? I'm looking through, and he said, well, what about this? And it was this video called SWTV. Said it had been uploaded in 2010. Had like
that is not to interrupt, but that is such a video editor thing to name a file, because that's some shit that I would name like a video file. Like I've exported things, you know, like biome soil science _final _v1 enter, and then just uploading it to Vimeo or whatever. So like, yeah, that's such a video editor thing to do. Sorry, continue.
And the funny thing is, I had gone through this page many times to see the videos, And I had always zoomed past this, and then so when he said that, I thought, "There's no way I didn't scan past that." Well, I did. I had scanned past it, and I saw so SWTV. I click on it instantly. This is it. Now I had seen Stargate Studios had done some show reels to other production companies, just showcase their work, and they had included the first 10-15 seconds of this in one of their show reels. So I knew instantly that this was official. And of course, this was their page, Stargate Studios. But the thing that was odd about it was, it was like maybe 40 views or something, and it's been, at this point, it had been 10 years since it was uploaded. So maybe it had been privately uploaded and then the person made it public, or maybe it had always just sat at the bottom of the barrel. But that's when I thought
maybe they had it listed like on Vimeo as like an unlisted video, and then they just changed it to listed or something like that. Like I know some people that have worked on stuff and like for like larger companies, and they have something set to unlisted on Vimeo just to share it to people so they can have the link. And then they've actually gone through and like relisted something. That way, like if someone's coming to go to like look at their work, they'll see like this thing that they worked on, but they always remember to unlist it. Maybe this would have been a situation where some, video editor who managed like their social media in the back end had like made it listed so that people could see it on accident, and then it was just like, hey, now it's out there. Yeah.
And actually, I wonder if it was a little accident because, so
hell of an accident.
It was exactly. It was funny because when I saw this, I naturally searched YouTube to see if no one had found this or put this up, and so I remember talking to my brother on the phone, going, "I think I found something, and I'm going to share it in the next couple of days, and I think it's going to go viral." And it's such a weird feeling. I didn't make this footage, obviously, but it was such a weird feeling to know that I could see that coming, and that I was pretty sure that was going to happen, and that it did happen. But I remember I put it together. I had a friend who suggested to me, well, you should put the behind the scenes as the second half. Because I thought,
so that way people could tell like its authenticity, like so people would know like this was actually a thing that was filmed.
He thought it was really neat, and I have to admit I hadn't thought about that, and then I thought, okay, because I had actually shared a little bit of what I found, and somebody had said, this is fake. I thought, okay, maybe put the behind the scenes as the second half, and so I shared it, and right around that time, I had come across this amazing document that this person had put together. It's linked in that video. Mm-hmm. So on my YouTube channel.
I'll share that link in the linked up just so everyone knows. Just make sure
you're right. So on the HoloNet YouTube channel, which is mine, it has an amazing Google spreadsheet. I've actually just recently, for the first time, talked a little bit with the guy who put it together. An amazing work this guy put over many years, all the information, every quote you can possibly imagine into this thing, every piece of information we know about Underworld. But I linked it in there, and I wrote a little description of what had happened and what this show was about and why it was canceled, Stargate Studios, what they were doing. And then I think of the comments I had mentioned, one of the stories was Ronald D. Moore, was a 2-part episode about Lucas going down to squash a rebellion in the lower levels of Coruscant. And Ronald Moore had worked on Deep Space Nine. So basically, it was very interesting because I uploaded, I put it on a YouTube channel, which initially, this is for any NJO fans out there. Initially, the first name of the YouTube channel, because I was convinced that this YouTube channel was going to get nuked immediately, like maybe 15 minutes. Yeah. It was going to get absolutely obliterated by the Death Star laser from Disney. And so I figured that was just going to be the end of it. And so I initially named the YouTube channel Zonoma Secret, because this planet is just so hard to find in the NJO.
It's always moving.
Right. And so I initially called it, I thought that's just too strange of a name, even though I love it. So I changed it to HoloNet. But to my great surprise, the video was not taken down. The channel was not destroyed immediately. And it was later that morning. It must have been 11 in the morning. I'm still in my PJs and I'm reading my YouTube description and my quotes in Forbes. Huh. I just remember it's in Forbes and like you have all these strange and just recently, just last year, you got Vanity Fair did a piece where they're asking Kathleen Kennedy and Filoni about this footage, and they're talking about it. And the Stargate Studios guys, and they're using these stills from the image, and that was just an interesting experience. I will tell you, I learned something fascinating. So when I first shared it to Reddit, I had initially shared the early blurry footage with the Star Wars EU subreddit because I love what that subreddit does. But the first comment was so like, this is fake, this is a fan. So I thought, well, I love this subreddit, but when I put the real thing, I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to put it on the main subreddit. I'm not going to, because initially that was my little token. I was going to give, all the traffic would go through this Star Wars EU subreddit to find this.
Yeah.
But then I was like, well, I'm sorry, after that mean comment, we're going to take a little break. So I put it on the main.
Suck it, Skooma. That's what he's saying.
Suck it. Yeah, it was definitely you, Joe. So I put it on the main Star Wars subreddit, and initially the image was the still for the video was initially just the stormtroopers, which a lot of publications ran with that. And I think even that might have even been the image that you put as the image for this. So everybody was using that stormtrooper image. And so all the first comments for the video were all about, oh, this is a cop show. This is a show about stormtroopers. Wow, this is interesting. And then, I changed the thumbnail because I kind of like the other thumbnail of the ship. And after that, all those comments evaporated. Everybody started talking about the world of Coruscant and all. So that just taught me how people respond off an image. The first image they see, they can respond just to people writing comments just on the thumbnail.
Oh, yeah.
So anyway.
That's the YouTube game. That's the YouTube game. It's all getting in the algorithm.
It is. So that was shared around. And then, of course, naturally, there were different YouTubers who reacted to it. It was very entertaining. I've told Skooma Joe about this. There were some people, I think John Campia had a little thing where they're talking about it, and he goes, oh, I'm sure this came from Disney. This came from inside Lucasfilm. Someone working maybe close to Kathleen Kennedy. They're testing the waters. They're putting test footage out there. They
always have to put like a spin on it. There's an insider at Lucasfilm who's fighting Kathleen Kennedy in the pits.
Yeah,
always somebody has to spin on it.
And there are other groups. I think Ryan Kinno and those other guys who were saying. I watched their video and they're going, I think this came from someone close to George. This is from their camp. And it was very fascinating that some people asking me, I remember I got a couple questions. They didn't know my username, but thinking, yeah, like Joe said, Kathleen Kennedy or George Lucas or someone who worked at Stargate Studios. And in fact, even if you look today on Wikipedia, no, not Wik, it's on Wikipedia, so on the actual wiki, it says that the footage was released in 2020 by Stargate Studios. I can assure you that's not true. But the funny thing is, later that day, so I was keeping a close eye on Stargate Studios' page. I was very curious how they would react to this because this is their work. I mean, Lucasfilm wanted, and we'll talk about this a bit more later, but like they wanted some test footage, and they did not. Lucasfilm didn't make this. What happened was Stargate Studios was brought in to work on this, and then Lucasfilm did the music, they did the sound effects, they dubbed it afterwards. You could clearly tell it was dubbed afterwards. And so they're doing all this other stuff. In fact, I think the person who shot it for Stargate Studios, he said it's the first time I've ever worked on something where the script was written after we shot it. So I mean,
not to like whatever, but that's like such a George Lucas way to do something. I don't know how involved he was in this project, but that's like the most George Lucas thing I've ever heard. I love the guy, but like, you always hear these stories about like, I love there's scene in like the behind the scenes footage of, I think it was in either Attack of the Clones or Revenge of the Sith, where he like watches a pre-cut version. He watches like an early cut of it, and he goes, I think I may have gone too far in a couple of places. Like that's like indicative of like most of his work. But just really quickly to sum up some of the stuff to some of the people we have here in the chat. This was like early, like pre-production. Like they were just kind of like testing out the footage to see how things would look, is my understanding. So this was a show that was supposed to happen. And X, do you know that much about like what the actual show was supposed to be about? Just really quickly, and then we can go back into like how all this stuff kind of played out for you on the back end.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'll answer that, but just quickly I'll say that later that day I saw Stargate Studios, their website was completely redone. So that was an extra confirmation. They removed the Vimeo. They removed. So I was like, okay. But anyway.
So is it not up on their page anymore? Like,
oh, it's
at
long
all?
gone. Yeah.
Oh,
it's gone.
so you're like the guy who has like the remaining cut of this.
That is true. But
Hell yeah, dude. That's such a sick story. But yeah, go ahead, continue.
In answer to your question, yeah. So the Road to Underworld's really neat. It was something George cared a great deal about. So, let me just take a drink of water here.
No worries. Go ahead. And then
Basically,
Tad, any
yeah, go ahead.
questions you have, Tad, you go ahead and you jump in. Don't let me lead the conversation.
Oh, I just had one so far. Do you know if Stargate Studios has actually had any affiliation with the Stargate TV show? Or is that just coincidental?
You know, I don't know.
I'm gonna look it up on IMDb really quick while we're talking here, because
they've worked on everything.
Thought.
They've worked on everything. They've worked on The Who. They've worked on all sorts of Doctor Who. I mean,
I was going to say, they did the music video. Oh, okay.
Well, yeah, of course. No, Doctor Who, and I think they've done so many shows. I don't know if they've done Stargate. That's it. I have to tell you, when I first saw the name of the company, that's what I thought too. But
yeah.
Oh damn, yeah, they have like done work with like basically everybody. They've done work on Monk, and they're like a CG. They're like a CGI company, correct? Like motion graphic stuff.
Right. So what they do, it's amazing. They have a setup. Maybe CGI was the wrong word. They use computers, but what they do is they it's a lot of superimposition stuff. I mean, it's kind of like in the prequels, everybody thinks, oh, it's CG. I mean, there is CG, but actually most of the prequels, it's just miniatures, and then when they shoot them on a green screen or blue screen, they're just superimposing the actors into the miniatures footage that they shot.
Yeah, that's like a big criticism. People will like, oh well, the prequels were all CGI, like not realizing like how they were using like blue screens and stuff like that. That was just like a big thing people used to say, like 2008, 2009, like back when it was still like in vogue to shit on the prequels. That was like a big thing people would say.
Oh, it still is.
Peak Red Letter Media days.
Yeah.
But so Stargate Studios really took that and ran with it in their own direction for these television projects. So I mean, what they'll do is, if you have a scene out in LA and there's all sorts of stuff happening in the background of a street, rather than clear the street, they will set up a little green screen unit, and then they will do that later, and it's amazing. You will never know that you've seen this effect, and that's most of Stargate Studios' work is, I would almost call them ghost effects. No one knows that effects have been done on these shows.
A lot of like real-time render type stuff.
Yeah, and it's amazing that they do it. But so Underworld was sort of taking that to the hilt. In 2005, George announced it at the Celebration 3 thing. He had wanted to do a show for a long time.
Damn, I guess I didn't realize that.
Yeah,
I remember some Star Wars Insider articles talking about it with him too.
Yeah, he was pretty excited about the show. What the show would have been, it would have been set after Order 66. He was very ambitious with his ideas for this series. So this would have been, okay, so early in the production, pre-production, I should say, early in pre-production, Rick McCallum, who was the producer on the prequels and the producer on Young Indiana Jones, he was going to be the producer for Underworld, and so he is the one that got this whole footage arranged with Stargate Studios, showed him the concept art, showed him this, said, hey, we want this, we want to show it, we're going to show it to Sci-Fi Channel, we're going to show it to ABC, we're going to show it to HBO, we're going to shop this show around, which they did do, and they got a different response from each of those companies. So basically, when they did it, initially, basically, people have it twisted with Rick and George. Sometimes people think, oh, Rick is just a yes man. Well,
yeah, I've heard that.
Okay, so the best way to encapsulate the relationship between George and Rick. Rick is actually a really good producer. If you go by the definition of what a producer is supposed to do, the prequels are a super success
Yeah.
because every movie came in on budget, on time, gave George
I think
everything
that's
he
like
needed.
that's people are kind of they hear the word producer, and I feel like a lot of people. Just really quickly, Zim, I did want to point out Insider at Lucasfilm that hasn't worked out so well for Doomcock. I have a personal grudge against people that like I've been getting a lot of comments from people saying like, "Oh, the Ahsoka show is going to retcon the sequel trilogy and stuff like that." That all comes from this one video this dude Doomcock did. It's all fan fiction, but a lot of people they get like the word producer twisted, and like they think that it means something that it doesn't. And normally on a film set, what a producer does is when the director asks for something, or like a script, like a screenplay, like supervisor or something like that, asks for something, they do it. That's like what a producer
right.
is. Like they're not there to tell somebody, no, that idea's stupid. That's like not their role. So I've heard that about him before, and I think that a lot of people they have a very large misconception on what that job is on a film set. But sorry, yeah, go ahead.
No, I think that's a great point. I mean, you're totally right. And that's why, I mean, by a lot of definitions, Rick McCullum has been a fantastic producer for George, which is why, they first worked together on Young Indy, which is an incredible show. And that show, they shot in 1,000 different locations with all these extras. And somehow Rick pulled that all together. And then Lucas liked that so much, he took that whole production team, Rick McCullum, Gavin Kay, Trisha Begar, who did the costumes, all these people, he moves on to the prequels. It's like the test run for the prequels. So then you do the prequels, and the prequels, their relationship was, I mean, George is the director, but he's also the owner of Lucasfilm, who employs Rick.
Yeah.
So, you're if you're a producer, that means that you're sort of above the director, but you're also below the executive producer, which would be George.
The person
So it's
funding a film is what is usually what an executive producer role means on a film set.
Yeah, so it's kind of funny because I mean Rick is funding. He's the producer who figures out how we're gonna get this, who we're gonna arrange this on budget, but the money is George's.
Yeah.
I mean, so it's kind of funny. So it's just something George doesn't want to do that he got someone else to do. So in the case of Underworld, Rick was going to produce this too, and this is kind of like their relationship is where George wanted to do something and Rick was like, okay, here's how we're going to do it. And then later on, George would be like, well, what if we do this other thing that's even bigger than the idea that I had? And Rick's like, I mean, we can, but we're trying to keep
I
it.
just pictured a very stressed producer like smoking cigarettes and drinking coffee, like outside of a film set, just like shit. Like I don't know how I'm gonna get this accomplished.
That's actually really funny
you
say that.
Producer roles, and it's like it's a stressful job for sure.
That's actually really funny you say that because that is who Rick McCullum is. So yeah, it's kind of I can't remember. I don't know if he still smokes. I seem to remember hearing that he did, and just all this kind of like swearing and just it's actually really surprising. You ever listen to Rick McCullum talk? Like there'll be F-bombs, and you'll be like, oh, but
that's something you don't get with like modern day. Like this isn't like me saying anything about like modern day Lucasfilm like in a negative way, but it's very like clean cut, and it's very. Everyone's having a great time, and like no bad things ever come up on film set, and everyone's just a really mega fan. They're all having a good time.
You don't see some 3D editor at his desk. He's like, I've been here since 5 a.m. yesterday. He's got a 5 o'clock shadow. He's got like 6 empty monster cans.
Yeah. Like you don't see like that side of it, which I really appreciate.
I haven't seen my wife and kids in 3 days.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Actually, that's why I think George was willing to put Rick through the ringer with Young Indy, which even though they all liked working on that show, that was a crazy project because you're saying, well, for the first time in television history, we're going to shoot these things like they're movies. We're just going to go to every location on Earth. We're going to, and that's just a huge nightmare to coordinate all that. And then
that's like semi-common now for like a lot of TV shows to have. I think we're coming to like the end of that time period in television production right now. Like a lot of people like streaming services and stuff like that, they have like a bunch of money because everyone was subscribing to like these 3 streaming services. So they were filming a lot of TV shows like they were films, like going on location, which is something that had not happened for a long time. And so, like, you get like 6-episode miniseries or something. Like, like, oh, Westworld is insane, like the way like they shoot those things. And that stuff, I think it's coming to an end because there's so many streaming services now that it's the same thing as cable. So like all these streaming services have like cannibalized themselves. So now they can't make a Westworld type show or like a young Indiana Jones show because everyone's competing for like the same pool of people that are paying for these things. So
You're right.
We're coming to the end of that,
yeah.
I think.
And I think, with a young Indy, you're right about that. And I think with them doing this kind of crazy film type thing and going everywhere, it's also, there's an extra layer because, George doesn't just say, we're going to shoot in Egypt. He goes, we're going to shoot at the pyramids. And then when we go to Greece, we want to shoot in the ruins. I mean,
that's like what they did with Naboo and stuff, right? Like they actually like went to like some palatial type of state.
Yeah, they went to Italy and all this. It's so George has these ideas where he doesn't just want to do X, he wants to do X in a way that no one's ever done it. And I think Rick proved to him when they did Young Indy that he was down for that. That Rick was the producer crazy enough to say, okay, let's do it. We'll somehow figure it out. And by the way, that's one of the reasons that Gary Kurtz, I think, didn't stay on for the original trilogy all the way through, because George is dissatisfied with the fact that, the way he was handling the money, the way he was handling the production, the way he would get skittish about some things. And George is just like, now we can do it.
Yeah.
So I guess that's the thing is George, whenever he worked on any of these things, everybody kind of agrees he's a visionary who just goes in his own direction. And whenever you've got somebody like that, it can be a little scary. You need a team that's willing to go on board and actually follow that. And so with the prequels, they really did. Now, the way this connects to Underworld is it was initially supposed to be, the pitch was it was going to be, we're on Coruscant, it's in the Underworld, we're not focusing on the main characters of the saga. We're going to focus on the time period between the films, the dark times, and it's mostly going to be interior shots. That was pretty much the idea. We're going to do a Sopranos type, Godfather type thing. It's mostly interiors. It's going to be a lot of film noir. And so we're not going to, I think there was an early interview with George where he's like, you're not going to recognize it as Star Wars because it's very adult. We're going in a different direction. There's going to be like beheadings and all sorts of crazy rape. And so, this is supposed to be the adult show. It's for the fans that have grown up that, they are like in these interviews, they're mentioning Godfathers. Or Godfather films, the Soprano show, they're just going on that. And so that was initially the idea. And then what happened is that George started to collect all these writers. Now, I do find it noteworthy. I don't mean this as a positive or negative, but I will note that George chose all the writers that he could find that he thought were great. He did not choose Filoni. Filoni was doing the Clone Wars show, and he didn't choose him. Sometimes people make it sound like Filoni was like the twinkle of George's eye. It was just somebody working on another show. So he, the Clone Wars was meant as a show for the kids. It was initially the idea. And then Underworld was going to be the adult show. And then for teenagers, we do 1313, which is the video game, which is going to tie in to both. Tie into Underworld. And so it was like this big project that it's all connected. And so that's why you get these references in the Clone Wars and you get this other stuff going on. They actually think 1313 is even referenced.
So was this show like going to also, because like Tad, he's got a lot of feelings about TCW.
We're on the same line of thinking here, but I'll let you go.
No. You go ahead. You go ahead. Go ahead, Tad.
Well, I think you were about to ask, was this some sort of, push for a sort of canon rewrite, you think? or like because we know it's no secret that TCW basically ignored the expanded universe. I mean, we have little sprinkles of it here and there, like there's Onderon for people who are fans of the KOTOR, and there's other little things here and there, but it was clear that a different direction was going continuity wise, and obviously 1313 would have retconned a lot of Boba Fett's backstory, which was already a mess at that point anyways. And then they were going to do that Maul video game too, which was also based off of all that. So it makes you wonder, was this like a canon reboot before the buyout sort of deal?
And just really quickly, I know that everyone brings up that Darth Maul game, like in a positive way. I will say that would have crushed my spirit to see that that redesign of Darth Krayt. I probably just would have been like beside my, because as a huge Legacy simp, as a huge John Ostrander fan, just the thought of Darth Maul being in any way, shape, or form interacting with Darth Talon, pass. But yeah, like essentially what Tad's asking, like, would this have been more in line with like the TCW style of storyline, or would it like have? Do you know anything about that?
Well, I guess there's two questions there. So one of them is, how is this interacting with the expanded universe? Mm-hmm. The plan was for 1313 and Underworld to be consistent with the expanded universe, but of course we have to keep in mind here that the way that Lucasfilm worked was, most of the time, there are exceptions that we can bring up, but most of the time the tail did not wag the dog at Lucasfilm. So the way I'll put that is that George is the company. George drives where we're going. The EU is like, oh, okay, that new road is paved, so now we can go build houses around it. But the way that George would usually do this, there are two examples of note that are cause problems. But usually the way George would do this is, he would say, I want to do X, I want to do this, so don't go there. Like, in other words, this part of the town is going to be under construction in the future, so don't build a park there, because I will bulldoze it. Like, I just will. and so usually that worked. In the case of the prequel stories, we all know that that's what he pretty much was saying. Mm-hmm. Don't do stuff to the Bantam people. Don't do too much detail on all that, because I'm going to do the movies. Then when he did the movies, he opened it up. Something like that is also the case with New Jedi Order. He said, you could do stories after, but not after like 20 years after. That time period is special to me. And then when he decided he wasn't going to do sequels, that's when he helped the New Jedi Order do their story. So then they do their thing. Yeah. And that, for a long time...
That's such a fleshed out era of Star Wars. So, like, did he just, like, pull the plug and they're just like, all right, we're just going to write 19 books with 12 different authors at the speed of light? Because all those books came out between, was it 1999 and 2003?
That's right. So
that's a very short time to release 19 books.
And all 19 of them, this is a tangent, but all 19 of them made the New York Times bestsellers list. And to Lucasfilm's great surprise, and sometimes, I don't know if I would say to their chagrin, but it was a surprise to them, that the books, pound for pound, were doing better than the prequel books and the Clone Wars books. Really? And the Clone Wars multimedia project, NJO just outsold everything. And so they were a little bit surprised. That's the real reason the Nightfall trilogy was canceled, was because
was Nightfall the one that's the one that takes place like in the Coruscant Underworld? Is that the one I'm thinking of?
Well, it would have been in the middle of NJO, but the reason that they canceled that is because they were like, listen, NJO is getting all the sales, and we really should. We're going to just take some of these books out of the lineup so that we can do more prequel books. I think that's how Cloak of Deception, and I think that's how Darth Maul Shadowhunter got born. is out of that. But anyway,
I mean, like,
yeah,
hugely,
it's George.
popular books in their own right. Yeah.
I was gonna say I love those novels anyway, so it does no skin off my nose. But
yeah, so yeah, George helped him with NJO a great deal at the start, so that's helpful. But anyway, he would usually, and I should say, Del Rey for a long time saw NJO as the end, and so they didn't plan anything after forever. And then George also never was involved after, so that's whole discussion. But usually what he would do is he would say, I'm not going here, you can go there. I'm going here, so you can't go there. And in the case of the Dark Times time, so Underworld era, right when they start thinking of doing a show, that's where everybody sort of gets this memo. Nope, we cannot touch this. And so, like, Crispin, AC Crispin, who had written the Han Solo trilogy, she had wanted to write like a young Leia novel, and she's told no, because Underworld is going to happen. And like, there's an idea that at Lucasfilm, they have this idea to kind of do a Rogue One type of story. To say no, that's going to be covered at Underworld. Can't go there. And
so would
so,
Underworld have like retcons like Kyle Katarn and stuff like that?
I don't know, but
it is a big galaxy. Who knows what's happening on Sulan? You know.
Yeah.
Initially, the plan was, and this kind of actually ties in with what I was saying. So initially, like I said, the plan is we don't touch the main characters of the saga. The plan was initially that it would connect with the EU in a bunch of ways, but mostly tell the EU guys to bug off so we can do our thing. And then at the same time as that, well, they're just trying to make sure that they're not doing one thing with the left hand and other thing with the right hand. But I think at that time, like I said, mostly interior. Now here's where things get interesting, because George starts to get more involved, more interested. So he gets writers from all over the world who have done TV. Not even sci-fi people sometimes, just like the best writers in the business. So people who did 24, people who did Sopranos, people who did some stuff that were nominated for Emmys or whatever. I think Ronald Moore, like I said, he had done Battlestar Galactica. So they have all these guys coming in to come by and break these stories with George, and they work out like 50 scripts. Crazy. I mean, George had this idea that they would do like, I think he had this idea that they would hundreds of episodes of Underworld. Like
I
one or
remember
200
seeing that like on one of your maybe it was like something we were discussing, that they had planned on doing like a crazy amount of episodes.
Yeah, and same thing with Clone Wars. He thought that Clone Wars should get 300. So,
Jesus Christ, that's a lot for a 3-year period.
Like I mentioned this, like in
it's
a video
already
that
pretty dragged out with at the time 5 seasons, but
post celebration, I had like I was like, I just can't anymore with the Clone Wars, because like they're making like the Tales of the Jedi show, which they already made the first season of that, use the same like font type and everything for the original Tales of the Jedi. And I was like, they announced they're doing another season of it, and I just thought to myself, I physically cannot. Every single second of that time period must be covered on screen in one way, shape, or form. Like, could we please just move on to anything else?
Yeah.
Like, as someone who I love the prequels, I love the Dark Times comics. I'm just done. I'm not watching any more of it. Yeah. I've already clocked out of a lot of those things. So, like this show would be something that I would be interested in, is like some kind of like darker, grittier, more contained story that just does not revolve around Ahsoka Tano appearing in every single. She's forever. No, yeah. I'm not even like a hater of TCW. I want to move past.
That reminds me of
my whole point.
That does remind me of the very funny story that Dave Filoni tells of when George first told him. I think they're talking, and George goes, "Anakin has an apprentice," and Dave goes, "No, he doesn't." And George goes, "Yes, he does." So that's how Ahsoka Tano was born. But
so it was his idea. I've always wondered, like, was it actually his idea? And I could never, in all of my research, I could never find who actually came up with it. It was always just like, Star Wars: The Clone Wars was created by George Lucas, and like I could never find like who created Ahsoka. Like, where did this character come from?
It's an interesting thing, that question, because basically Dave created this character, I think Ashla or something, created this character that was meant to be an apprentice to Plo Koon, because Dave loves Plo Koon. George has this very funny quote where he says, I have to keep Dave from including Plo Koon in every episode because if I don't, he will. And there's a very George
like I've never understood like that obsession. He looks cool, sure, but like I've never understood that like love that people have for Plo Koon, I guess.
Yeah, there's a very funny story George tells. George can sometimes be a really funny guy, and so one of the funny stories he tells is he and Dave are talking, and George, they're talking about the show, and Dave goes, if you ever revisit the prequels, couldn't you do? And he means it seriously. Couldn't you, when Plo is coming in the ship, couldn't you just include a frame or something of like an escape pod or like a parachute, an ejection seat with a parachute? And George goes, "Oh yeah, so I could include that, and then I'll have him land on a spike like a top of a tower. It'll just be it'll just impale him." Yeah, there's another funny story.
He put up his boundary. He kept it there. Good for him. Oh, hey Moose. Sorry,
there's another funny story.
I'm gonna take my dog upstairs.
Yeah.
Oh sure.
You guys talk amongst yourselves.
There's another funny story just while he's out about that.
Yeah.
I think Tony Gilroy. Was it Tony? Henry Gilroy. We got multiple Gilroys at this point. We got Tony doing Andor. So Henry Gilroy, who does this show with Dave. Gilroy and Dave are doing Clone Wars. He has this suggestion about having if you have a hut in his basement, there's a Rancor. And just like Return of the Jedi, but George hates repeating himself. He absolutely hates it. So George is not on board with this idea, but Henry Gilroy is going, no, we could do an episode where, there's a Rancor down there. And George goes, okay, you know what? We will do that. And then underneath, there'll be like a gated floor. And underneath the floor, there will be all these creatures that like scoop up the Rancors, and we'll name them Gilroys.
What a dickhead.
It's like poetry, it rhymes.
It's just the funniest, George. Just, my God. But
I love that. I mean, I know that like not to go too far back in the conversation, but Tad and I at one other point we were having a conversation about like whether or not George Lucas's input as to whether or not Legends was canon or the Expanded Universe was canon or whatever. Doesn't really matter. But I remember when we were talking about that, Tad was just like, the thought that anybody would give Anakin Skywalker an apprentice is insane. And I like up here, my set said Ahsoka being Plo Koon's apprentice would have been way better. It just does not make sense to give a complete sociopath like Anakin Skywalker a Padawan, because I mean everyone knew that he was like kind of, fucked up a little bit. So Ahsoka's existence has always kind of bothered me a little bit, but I know that people love her, so I don't want to dunk on them liking it too much. Like I don't want to upset people for liking it. So if you like Ahsoka, that's great. Just it doesn't make any sense to me. But yeah, sorry, go ahead, continue.
Well, James Lindsay actually said something along those lines where they had asked him towards the end of the EU. He said, or they said, "Do you guys have to stick to canon? Do you have to be really careful?" And he goes, "Well, yeah. In fact, the person who breaks canon the most now is George, because he said, if you look at the Clone Wars show, he brought up the fact that, in episode 3, Anakin's whole deal is about he can't be a master. He wants to be a master, and he's got an apprentice. So I mean, there's two things to that though, because the reason George wanted Ahsoka to be Anakin's apprentice is because he felt that Anakin and Obi-Wan should be a more significant part of the show. He just liked those characters. He made them. He wanted to spend more time with them.
Yeah.
And I think his reason for inventing Ahsoka as a character is he had, daughters at the time, and he felt that maybe there weren't enough female heroes in Star Wars. So he wanted Ahsoka to be there. But I think it should be noted that George had very clear ideas that Ahsoka was going to be dead within a very soon time frame.
I did come across this. I did come across.
Yeah, Tad did a great video essay on TCW and stuff like that. So yeah, she definitely. Even right now, personally, I'm like, just please kill this character because I'm sick for being in everything. But yeah, go ahead, continue on that train of thought.
Yeah, Dave, he admits to this that the plan was that and we'll get back to Underworld, but the plan for Ahsoka is that they're breaking the story where Ahsoka leaves the Jedi Order, right, under investigation, all this. And George's plan was that the Order would realize their mistake and she would be welcomed back in, and that Ahsoka would come back to the Jedi, and that she would continue on as the Jedi until her end, which we have never been. I don't think it's ever been revealed if George wanted her to die in Order 66 or if he wanted her to die before Revenge of the Sith. I don't know, but it was one of the two. And Filoni says in the interview that, he's like, I knew that George wanted to kill her, and I knew we had very fierce disagreements about this, and George was very much in the kill Ahsoka camp. And so he said that his idea at the time was to try to pitch this idea to George that if she left the Order, it could make for a more interesting story. But then he goes on in the interview to say, I was really trying to save Ahsoka to get her as far away from the Jedi as possible to avoid being killed by Lucas, because George would kill her if she was a Jedi. And so basically stripping her of all of her Jedi attributes and saying to George, she's not a Jedi, she won't be a Jedi, therefore we don't have to kill her. And so, kind of was the idea there. Yeah.
I mean, I will say, she has good moments in current canon and stuff like that, and I will address really quickly my site's comment here. Where it says Bastila Shan, Misha Surik, Vicious Mar, and Gali, Adi Galia, really George on female heroes. I'm assuming what he wanted was more female characters on screen is what George Lucas was looking for, because we all love Bastila Shan and Misha Surik. Go ahead, Tad.
I was gonna say, well, then in that case, you already have a bunch there. You've got Shakti, you've got Aayla Secura, you've got Barriss Offee, who they fucking massacred.
I will say this about Shakti: she obviously was an afterthought for George Lucas because she gets killed 3 different times.
Yeah, but in the original cartoon, she was a badass. She took on 7 freaking Magna Guards at the same time, trying to defend the Chancellor. I would have liked to see a lot more action. And the only time they include her in the show is she's just hanging out on Camino, just be like, "Hey, it's me, Shakti. You see me in the background before. I'm in the background again."
I've actually watched.
I mean, Shakti.
I've actually watched very little of the Clone Wars. I watched someone had a big list of things that you need to watch in the Clone Wars.
Brian, I don't think we could be friends. I'm sorry.
No, well, I mean TCW, not.
Okay. I thought you meant the OG.
I mean the OG. Each minute's 3 episodes, 3 minutes long. That's easy for me to consume.
Which I have to tell you, I would love to discuss that a little bit with Gandhi and George, because they had a very interesting relation. But go on.
I'd like to discuss that too, because I have all the commentary. I have the DVDs signed by Anthony Daniels and the guy who played General Grievous in the first season was the same guy who did Bender. I can't remember his name.
Yeah. No way. God.
Yes.
He was also the Joker, in a
John
Batman
DiMaggio. I got his signature on my thing too. But
I absolutely love Futurama. It's probably my all-time favorite show. Period. Bar none.
Yeah. So
always been huge on it. Yeah.
Now in season 1 of the original Clone Wars, Bender is General Grievous.
Usually I can pick his voice out of most things that he's in. And
Heavily
for some reason that
distorted.
one, that might be usually I can tell whenever he's in anything, and it's usually a Matt Groening, the guy who made The Simpsons. Usually in some of his stuff, so I can usually be okay, that's Bender. I can definitely call it out. But yeah, I guess I never realized that. it's been a hot minute since I've watched like those original 3-minute long shorts. But no, what I was referring to was TCW, like the Cartoon Network one. I don't know. Maybe it just like didn't hit me at the right time, and like I watched, like someone had like here's like a big list of all the episodes that are necessary to watch. I watched like maybe 50% of those, and I was like, I think I'm good. Not because the quality of the show was bad, but just because I was like, like 23. I was like, this maybe isn't intended for me. And then I watched all of season 7 and all of season 6, and season 6 was, I believe, where they introduced like Samurai Bane. And I was like, what? I was like, what the fuck? And they changed Korriban to Moraban, and I was like, damn. Yeah, I can definitely see why that one nerd on YouTube was upset about nerd being you, Tad. Because I watched your video about it first, and then I went and watched like season 6. I was like, oh damn, yeah, that totally makes sense why that guy was mad. This was before I knew. Yeah.
Yeah, George would sometimes on the fly, if we end up talking about 1313 some, it's one of those things where George, one of the reasons we love Star Wars and we love him is that he was forward thinking and creative, but that also meant that he just thought on his feet all the time. And that was the same with this. I think with Korriban, changing the name to Moraban is just like probably one of those just moment things where George is like, I like Moraban. We should do Moraban. And it's like, okay, well.
You should have thought about this 30 years ago, George.
yeah. I always other people's impressions of George Lucas. And my go-to impression for George Lucas is always, there's a parody video of him doing like the Jedi mind trick, and he goes, "You'll get me a Diet Coke." That's like my go-to anytime I'm doing an impression of him. That's such a good one. And there's also like another fake like interview with him where he was like, yeah, I bought a giraffe and I killed and ate it because fuck you, I'm rich. Like that's how I prefer for George Lucas to act in real life. But yeah, sorry, we'll continue on without my tangents.
That's all good. I just realized I never originally answered your question, Tad.
About like whether or not it would be in Legends.
It's all right. We've gone on like 30 different tangents. This is how all of our streams go.
Yeah, I'm bad.
But I will answer it in answer to whether George made Ahsoka. So Dave designed her character, Dave invented her, but George decided that she would be Anakin's apprentice. That was his input. And that she would wear a crop top. Those are two of George's inputs. And
all right,
I don't know how I feel about
I don't know. I mean, I don't even know. It's just something, if you look at a lot of the Jedi in the prequels, the women have crop tops. I don't even know if it's a physical. Yeah, it's just a George thing. But
he's like, Darth Talon. I really love that character. A lot of character development in that character.
Yeah, right. So it's one of those things though where so I wanted to mention this quick about Gendy. Right. Okay. So maybe if you don't mind, I'd be interested if we took a little backtrack to before Underworld, because there were other TV shows that
believe
died before they were born.
Believe it or not, there were other TV shows.
Yeah.
The
first one.
You mean like there were other TV shows prior to them planning Underworld?
Yeah. So I did want to get to this, and this is probably the best time to do it, and it does tie into Gendy. So
let's go for it.
Young Jedi Knights. This is one of the things that I was pretty much fell off my chair when I was doing some research, and I found this on some super ancient message boards from like 1995 or something. And he got yeah.
Sorry, that comment just caught me off guard.
These are funny
huge
comments.
Character development.
Yep.
Sorry, go ahead. Young Jedi Knights.
Well, we found George. So ultimately, I think
Sorry.
Hold on. It's
I always love people
she's the
like,
key to all this.
Jokes about her being like George was just like super thirsty for her all the time. I love the thought of horny George. It's just like, ooh, Darth Talon, huh? Go ahead.
Okay, it is funny though, because that's how Ayla Secure ended up in the movies. Is he had just seen her cover art somewhere, and
from like the Republic comics.
Yeah, and he was just like, "What's that?"
I guess I didn't realize that she was a comic character before being a movie character.
I just imagine that conversation. It's like, well, George, we've already done the casting. Rick, she's in the movie. She's in the movie.
He's like, all right, give me a second. I'm going to go crack open my Marlboros really quick, and I'll get right on it.
And with Quinlan Voss, it was the reverse. He appeared in the movies as a background character first, and then John Ostrander made him into a character. And then George actually liked Quinlan Voss enough to where when John Ostrander was going to kill him off at the end of Republic, George is like, yeah, no, I don't want you to do that.
Yeah, George, he's kind of
that choice.
He was George was charmed by a lot of the EU stuff, and he
did read the comics, if I'm not mistaken. Like he read
he did. He did. He read a lot of the comics.
He's a visual guy. He's not like a.
Yeah.
He's not like a. He's not a. I don't picture him reading books in his retirement.
I picture him just looking at pinups of Darth Talon on the beach somewhere.
I'm pretty certain. Well, it's George. He's got $1 billion. He could definitely pay for people to just.
He's got a lot more than $1 billion at this point. People forget that the other $2 billion he was paid was in Disney stock options.
Mm-hmm.
That's true.
He was paid $2 billion in cash, $2 billion in stock options, and Disney stock probably went up a shit ton. He probably sold a bunch of them, and he's ungodly wealthy. So yeah.
Yeah, and he's making that museum, which props. I will be there.
Oh, dude, same, 100%. Yeah.
Have you seen the design of it? It's incredible.
I saw some of it, I think I want to say on the EU subreddit.
It's like the USS Enterprise is how it looks like. It's amazing.
Oh, wow. That's
but
cool.
It helped if I had the right keyboard plugged in, but yeah,
it's just unbelievable. It's looks like it is from the year 3000 instead of 2000. But anyway, by the way, I can't say for sure. I really can't say for sure, but because George bought so much EU art, I mean, he loved the EU art, so he'd be buying like all the covers of Dark Empire almost. He's buying all the covers that Drew Struzan did for Bantam, and he's just loving it. So I have to think that some of that will be in the museum. I would not be surprised if some of the EU art is in the museum.
I gotta go then. I just don't want to go to California.
He wanted to do it in Chicago. Yeah. He wanted to do it in Chicago, but they weren't on board.
Where am I more likely to die? California, Chicago?
I'm definitely Chicago. Chicago's a bit more dangerous than. So my wife is actually from Chicago. I usually say Chirac. Chicago is really not that bad. Like if you're on the wrong side of the tracks, shit could go south. But it's really not that bad. California is actually a lot safer than a lot of people picture it being. Now, listen, you go to Baltimore, you're in for a bad time. I've been in Baltimore twice. Both times I was there, people tried to sell me meth. So let's just keep that.
Wow.
Baltimore is definitely a rougher city than either LA or Chicago. I always say this. I'm a huge fan of punk music and hardcore punk and stuff like that. There's a reason why all good punk music comes from Baltimore. Because it absolutely sucks to live there as a working class person. So,
well, you know what?
This gives you music.
This gives you an opportunity, Brian. Is next time you go there, that you just wear the shirt, "Not here for meth." Clears up everything.
Yeah.
But
cut it off before it starts.
Yeah, I don't understand, but I think so this Young Jedi Knights thing.
Yes.
Basically. This is very interesting. So this is really the first thing that I know of. I mean, there were droids and Ewoks. They did those shows. But this is the first thing that I know of where they're thinking in terms of, after it's been a long time since the films, we're going to draw outside the films. And that's a situation where a Fox Kids executive was sitting around in a restaurant or something and then struck up conversation with Kevin Anderson and Rebecca Moesta, who are writing the first novels for the Young Jedi Knights, 1995. And this Fox TV executive goes, well, I think there's something in this we should do. We've been having success, Batman, Spider-Man, X-Men, all these television shows in the 90s. Why don't we pitch this to Lucasfilm, see if they'll do a show of your books?
Oh, I didn't realize they were going to pitch it to George Lucas. I thought that.
Now this is funny. this is hilarious, right? Because you understand the industry. The way that this works normally is that if you're in George's position, you're the one. If you're a creative person, you pitch to these big guys.
Mm-hmm.
The big guys don't knock on your door, get down on their knees, and ask, "Hey, could we please have your license? And could you please?" That is what happened at this time. So they went to George and they went to Lucasfilm, and Lucasfilm's answer was the answering machine, because they were really busy working on the special editions, the prequels.
Yeah, what year was this that this was happening again?
Like 95, 96 is when.
Yeah.
Now that would have been interesting. Firstly, if they had done a television show animated of the young Jedi Knights. I mean, we can't even imagine the way that would have changed things in terms of Jason, Jaina, Anakin. I mean, is a sequel trilogy the way that it's conceived now? Is that even possible when you have nostalgia for? I don't know, but now this is speculation on my part, but this does tie into the Genndy conversation. So I thought to myself, well, who would they get to do this? Let's say that Lucasfilm says, okay, sure. What is the production team? Who do they get? Well, this is interesting because Lucasfilm has a tendency to go back to people that they've worked with before. They've always done that. And on the Clone Wars, when they worked on that show, the 3D show, they went back to Paul Dini, who had worked with them on the Droid Ewok stuff, but he's more famous for doing Batman the Animated Series.
Huh.
And I looked at this, and right at the time that they're proposing Young Jedi Knights, Batman's wrapping up. And so I find it possible that they might have asked Paul to do it. Where Genndy comes in is that Genndy he got his start working on Batman the Animated Series. So if anyone out there is asking themselves, is it possible that Genndy Tartakovsky could have done a Young Jedi Knights TV show? Yes, it is possible.
Oh my God, that's so
that could have
sick.
but
damn, dude.
Okay, so fast forward a couple years, 2003, 2002. What happens is Lucasfilm wants some promotional stuff for Attack of the Clones and for the Revenge of the Sith. They want some stuff that's going to keep the fan base alive, just little stuff. And so they're looking to who would do this, and they're talking to Cartoon Network. And Cartoon Network suggests, well, what about Genndy Tartakovsky's doing Samurai Jack? The whole team, they'd love to do it. So they asked Genndy. Genndy was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you're asking me that. Do Star Wars. And so they're all game. And then at that point, what they did is they said, well, hold on, if we're going to do little things, why don't we bump it up from little things? I mean, it's funny to think that this is a big bump up, but they are like, can we bump it to 3 minutes instead of doing like a 30-second thing? And so they said, sure. And then when they told George that they got Genndy, this is really interesting. So they told George, and George was really excited because he loved Samurai Jack.
He's a huge weeb. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, it's true. By the way, George actually likes anime and loves Akira and all this stuff. So, anyway,
if I were to pick out any director that was a huge anime, like a weeb, it's for sure George Lucas, 100%.
George. Yeah. So, manga all the way up to the wall. But anyway, he
nothing but Darth Talon and manga as far as I can see.
Right. Exactly. So George, at this time, he's excited. So George, when George respects, you see this tendency all throughout the history of the EU and all throughout the history of him working with people. If George respects you, he gives you guidelines and lets you go, do your thing. If he likes you, he believes in you, so he encourages you to do your own thing. If he doesn't trust you very much, and he doesn't fire you, then he's giving you like very strict guidance and very like is on you all the time. So in the case of in the case of Clone Wars, because he was so excited to have Genndy on, he's like, okay, and then he kind of gave this notion to these other guys. All right, let them do their Star Wars. I want to see what they're gonna do. And so then they did Clone Wars, and George watched it and he loved it. He used to watch him with his son Jet. So they'd watch Clone Wars. Huge fan. And
Was
so
that the one
after
who
the
was
first,
is that the one that was in the Order 66 scene? That son?
yeah, he also put
he's
him
the one
in
who
episode
attacks
2.
Commander Appo on the landing pad when Bail Organa's
Yeah.
trying to. Yeah.
Yeah,
Other
he
really
throws him
quick,
in.
very, very brief tangent. It's insane to me that all those clone troopers saw Bail Organa there, and he never got arrested after that. Like, he's witnessing like a genocide happening, and they're like, we'll let it slide. He's fine. Like, I always found that bit to be weird. That he just
never happened.
went to the Senate the next day and just went right back to his job.
It's fabricated. Never happened.
Yeah, basically.
I would love, there should be a follow-up, maybe like 2 months later. Bail is walking down the streets of Coruscant, and he just sees a stormtrooper staring at him, and he's staring at the stormtrooper. And there's a moment of recognition that under that helmet, I know that you were the goddamn one that was shooting that jet. Anyway, it's that meme of the two cars driving past, and you're staring at each other.
Yeah. That's a good one.
Yeah, so I love, by the way, Robot Chicken did that so perfectly. I think they might have been the first ones to really nail this, is with that Wampa who gets his arm cut off and Luke at the gas station, and they're just staring once he realizes who he is.
It's so good.
That's another whole thing. Whenever George would have those Robot Chicken guys in, they would have to bring in producers to say, like, get back on task, because he would just joke around for like 3 hours with those guys, like Seth Green and George.
I love those videos of like them messing around, like that pretty famous like Mara Jade clip where he's like, "Oh, we're gonna bring in a Mara Jade." He's like, "Get out of my office." That always cracked, because people took that like clip seriously for a long time.
Yeah,
it's clearly a joke. Like, it's obviously he starts laughing after he slaps that dude in the face.
Yeah, it's
Great
very
improv
funny.
Like George Lucas in that scene. He's like, "I'm just gonna slap this dude."
Physical actor.
Yeah, 100%.
George had seen the first season of Clone Wars, really liked it, and so then with the second season, he decided to work more closely with Genndy on it, and that was a productive relationship. They came up with a storyline for that. And then after that, George, it's right around 2004, 2005, early 2005, and George is thinking about doing the Clone Wars, the animated show, and then doing Underworld and doing all this. He's got his sights set on TV. And at that time, he starts sending the word down to everybody that I want Genndy Tartakovsky to lead Lucasfilm Animation. And not only does he want Genndy to lead Lucasfilm Animation, he says that he wants him to be the John Lasseter of Lucasfilm Animation, which means I want you to basically be like the head of Pixar and just you do your projects for me for the indefinite future. You will be the head of that department for Lucasfilm, because we're going to do TV. And so since we're doing TV, you're in charge, basically. George's going to be coming in, but it's also going to be a situation where he's saying, Genndy, you are going to run the roost down here. And
so how did Dave Filoni end up getting that job then?
Well, that's very interesting. So what ends up happening is those conversations get really far. Genndy really respects George, and George really respects Genndy, just as artists, not as a master-student thing, but just as equals, kind of. And so they get really far in those negotiations, so far, in fact, that there's one meeting left. And after that meeting, Genndy has the job, and he's going to lead Lucasfilm Animation. And they're there ready to sign the contracts. In fact, Gendy's wife, he brings his family to
Skywalker Ranch,
San Francisco. Yeah, San Francisco, to start looking for houses.
Can we go back to this timeline? I want to live in this timeline. I don't like the one we're currently living in.
I want the one Tad audibly groan.
I want the one where I get more Captain Fordo instead of Captain Rex and Ahsoka shoved down my throat.
Right. Now, in terms of how on earth does this possibly go, how does this possibly go wrong, right? I mean, you think you got a dream team here, Genndy Tartakovsky at Lucasfilm. And basically, they're at this meeting. Gendy's there, George is there, Lucasfilm financial people are there. And they're talking it out, this finally hashing it all together, that Gendy's going to lead these projects for Lucasfilm. And Genndy brings up, he goes, well, that sounds great. I would love to do your Star Wars shows. I would love to do other shows. The one thing I do want is that I've been doing animation for like, at that point, it's been like 15 years. I've been doing animation on television. And it's always been my dream. This is Gendy. He's like, this has always been my dream to do a feature. I think I could do a feature. I would love to do a feature, animated, live action, doesn't matter, but I would love to do a film for the big screen for Lucasfilm. And he pitches to them this idea, not Star Wars, but, you know, Lucasfilm used to do a lot of other things other than Star Wars. So he said, you know, we could do something else. And it's something along the lines of How to Train Your Dragon. It's kind of a Viking ish thing, but we would do it. We would do a movie. It would go to theaters, but I still do your Star Wars stuff. I still do all this, but he asked what George would ask. I want to do my thing, and we'll do your thing too. And what ends up happening is everybody in the room is like, sounds good, Gendy, except for one guy, which is, in this case, God George.
Damn it, Gendy. You ruined it.
George,
you ruined it for me.
And George goes,
I swear to God.
Yeah. George goes, well, no, we're not doing movies anymore. And Gendy's like, well, I'll still do the shows, but just every once in a while, I think we could do a movie.
But TW started with a fucking movie. God damn it. George.
I know.
Yeah, that movie was
that's where it gets
bad.
It's very ironic here. So George goes, no, the future of entertainment is in television. And we'll talk a bit more about that once we get to Underworld. But he said the future of television is the future of Star Wars. The future of everything is in television. And so Gendy's like, well, I don't want to be locked down to just do Star Wars and just do TV for the rest of my life. So if I can't do this other stuff, then I guess, it's not going to work. And so then it didn't work. And then George looks like, who's number 2 on the list? And then, well, there's this guy who's been working on Avatar: The Last Airbender, and he, so they call down to this, and it's funny because I think Dave says, he had gone in his Plo Koon cosplay to Revenge of the Sith. And Revenge of the Sith was still playing in the theaters when his first week on the job came in. So I think he comes in and then suddenly they're just like, hey, you want to lead Lucasfilm Animation? And it's like, what? So then Dave takes it. Yeah.
Well, I mean, can you blame that? Like if George Lucas was like, I want you to be in charge of all this stuff. I mean, like, of course he's going to say yes. And credit where credit's due. I know that he did work on Avatar: The Last Airbender. Absolutely love that show. And then very, 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 very quick tangent. Legend of Korra is better than Avatar: The Last Airbender. I don't care what anyone says. All right, we're going to ignore that point I just made. We're going to continue on the conversation. And so Dave Filoni took over for Gendy.
Yes, he did. And if you think about where Filoni is now and where Gendy is now, where Gendy would be now if he was in Filoni's spot, all the things that Filoni has touched, if you swap those two names, I think it'd be a very radically different timeline.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And Gendy's actual respect for the EU makes me think that we'd be in a more EU friendly version of Star Wars than we are today.
He was very proud of the fact, that it was part of the timeline. Yeah.
He was very knowledgeable. Like he included Ilum, which was the planet that they got all the lightsaber crystals from. And actually during one session, this is one of my favorite stories about Gendy and George. They were sitting down for lunch one day discussing the show. And when they're talking about showing Anakin becoming a knight, and Gendy's like, oh, you must have all these ideas for like how, like what a knighting ceremony actually goes into, like, what different like rituals the council might perform to, initiate a Jedi Padawan into becoming a knight. And then George just goes, no. Really, no.
Right. And it's really hit or miss. And that's the interesting thing about George, because what you said, I'd not heard that before, but that's very funny. I believe
it's in the commentary of season 2, I believe.
Yeah, see, that totally fits, but at the same time as that, and this is really true, they're happening like the same time. Stover goes in to talk with George about doing Revenge of the Sith, And George unloads on him for like 3-4 hours about Star Wars lore and like stuff in his head about stuff we've never seen, stuff about the new Sith Wars and all sorts of stuff that was never seen the light of day anywhere. And Stover, by the way, that was a conversation that was recorded and transcribed, so someone needs to get that.
Yeah, I promise. It's super quick.
So why aren't you getting on that? Come on.
Super quick. I'm just going to point out this thing. Yes, Korra, the series that did a last-minute lesbian romance to make people remember it is anything more than a mediocre sequel. I don't care. We got metal bending, and it was sick as shit. And I got to see Toph just doing a bunch of metal. It was sick. Like, the animation in Legend of Korra, it's top-notch. I was being a little bit sarcastic when I'm saying that it's just legitimately better, just because I feel like that series is slept on a lot, and the animation in that series is fantastic. The way that they produced that show is absolutely ridiculous. Like, they were just like, we'll do one season, and then we'll think about doing another season. Okay, we'll give you another season. Then eventually it went to streaming. But I will say I love both of them equally. They're both like children to me. I can't pick or choose one over the other. But I'm just saying, Legend of Korra had lava bending, and that was sick as shit. All right, continue. We want to get this leaked conversation from George Lucas. And
so would that be Earth or Fire?
Earth. Yes. I just rewatched like scenes from that series very recently. That's why it's fresh in my mind. But yeah, continue.
I was gonna say earlier that so I don't want to torture you guys with these possibilities here, but it did occur to me that when I was finding this out about Gendy's sort of ending up there, not going in that direction. You know, I mean, if you look at what Lucasfilm was doing in the 80s and 90s to support itself, it diversified. They were doing Indiana Jones. They were doing Star Wars. They were doing all those other games for LucasArts that people kind of have a tendency to forget about. Monkey Island. Yeah, exactly.
Tad, he had that one already.
Yeah, you know, so Lucasfilm's doing 1,000 things. I mean, they even have Lucy Wilson, basically creator of the EU. They have her out there like trying to do tie-ins with Grateful Dead, the band. So I mean, they're trying to do any kind of thing. And
what?
I know. It's one of the funniest.
Just a reminder, Jefferson Starship, the band, is canonical to the Star Wars universe.
Right, of course.
Special. So there you go.
I was like, I feel like you're passing over this point very quickly.
It's the scene right after Chewbacca's dad watches VR porn in their living room.
Yeah.
Are those technically Disney canon still?
No, they did not include the holiday special.
Oh, that's bullshit, you cowards. Include it.
They conveniently
that is one
did
of
not
those
include...
funny...
Oh, sorry, continue.
That is one of those funny stories about George and the EU that when Michael Kube, I think is how you say his name, Kube McDowell, was doing the Black Fleet Crisis, he had a plan to have Chewie have multiple wives, and he told that, well, we need
brother.
We're going to put this outline, you know, George was looking at all the outlines back then, so we're going to throw this outline past George. And basically, at that point, George is like, well, you know, we do have this other thing. And they basically tell him to do the holiday special to keep that as the canon backstory, that he has a son, he has a wife. And it's funny to me because even if George hates the holiday special, I can blame Black Fleet Crisis for giving us Lumpy canonically in the EU, and Mala in Itchy, and yes, Jefferson Starship.
Super quick, I just wanted to point out to JT, one of the Basement Boys, he was just over at Star Wars Celebration in jolly old England. Looks like he had a great time. I believe like there was like a ton of Starkiller himself, I believe, was there. And like I'll not to interrupt too much here, but I saw a bunch of clips of Hayden Christensen coming out and people cheering so hard that he started crying, and I'm like, yes, I was so happy because like Hayden Christensen was so shit on for such a long time, so it's very heartwarming to see.
The fact that he was shit on for so long makes me angry. Him, Ahmed Best, Jake Lloyd, they got the brunt of everything, and it's weird. Ewan McGregor never gets any shit because he was fabulous.
I mean, yeah, dude, he was crushing it, and
you know, I will say this:
like Disney has done a pretty good job of at least still praising those characters. They didn't at first with J.J. Abrams, who was like, the prequels never happened, but they included Ahmed Best as a Jedi in The Mandalorian Season 3, and Hayden Christensen has been getting a lot of love from the Star Wars community again, finally. I just think it's like a good celebration of those people, yeah.
You know, that's true. It's funny, in some of the research that I've done, you find that this is somehow in Star Wars online fandom from the very beginning. I didn't encounter it growing up. All the Star Wars fandom that I grew up with was really positive towards all the films, but you go back and you can find like message boards of people in 1996 going, George has ruined Star Wars. And George
Well,
has
that
ruined
was
Star Wars.
that was back when everybody that had a computer was actually a basement dwelling nerd.
Yeah, 100. I mean, a lot of the forums that I was on, like I remember reading people's opinions about the Yuuzhan Vong. People fucking hated the Yuuzhan Vong. Like they're looked back on very fondly now that like we've gotten so far removed from them, and like I mean, it's a series of 19 books. You really can't judge it off of just this, like, you know, the main antagonist of the series or whatever. But I remember a lot of the forums that I was on reading people being like, "This, I can't believe that George Lucas is even letting this happen. This is ridiculous." Like people were.
It's so funny that they say that because George is the reason the Yuuzhan Vong even exists. They were going to do something else, but I think, you know, I agree with you. But it's funny though. I think one of the things I've definitely learned through all this research is that the online side of it is, and you could really see that with the release of the new Avatar movie. The online side, especially the further back you can go, is so almost disconnected from the rest of the world's watching of it. I mean, there were Gallup polls that were taken of the Phantom Menace. Like, I'm surprised, but that's pretty neat that they took Gallup polls throughout the summer to see how people felt about this movie. And the numbers that come back, something like 90% of kids loved it, 80% of adults thought it was great. So I mean, you have this thing, but if you go back online, you find all these fandom wars, and so it's the online thing seems to be kind of a thing. I have to admit to you, this is just a little thing, but there are some very amusing things. If you go back far enough, Google has archived some of these super old forums, and if you go back, some of them are hysterical. I mean, there's like the state of fandom was not always great. I mean, I think one of the thread titles was, there was this rumor that Mark Hamill had been cast as Grand Admiral Thrawn. Very amusing.
What?
There's another.
That's somebody taking the piss.
For sure.
That's what I thought too.
But you guys keep talking. I'm gonna run to the restroom right over here really quick. Keep going.
Sure.
I pee really bad.
One of the other thread titles was fantastic. Someone who seemed genuinely confused, talking about how, in the next prequel films, are we going to see Darth Vader fight Anakin Skywalker? And
did he just not watch Return of the Jedi?
Hey, Baron Omegadon. Yeah, no problem, man. Legacy revealed it was nominated for a couple Emmys. Somehow it didn't end up on the Blu-ray discs. I don't know why. Disney Plus is not putting it on their streaming, but it deserves to be seen. So I'm glad you liked it. But yeah, it's funny, you were talking about this, Tad, about the release of the Clone Wars movie. And that's one of those things too, right? See, say no to Gendy. Sorry, Gendy.
But then say yes to Dave.
Well, and that's the funny thing, is that George always planned for TV to be the future eventually. There are even some quotes of him in the 90s talking about streaming for video games. I mean, really thinking ahead. But once you get to 2008, they're working on the Clone Wars pilots in 2007, and George likes him. He likes him so much. He's like, why don't we stitch some of these episodes together, put it out as a movie? And there was a look of kind of like terror from the animators going, we did not. We did not plan this as a movie. We didn't put it together as a movie. We didn't animate it as a movie. And George was like, no, it'll work really well if we just put a lot of the episodes together, put some transitions in there, and we'll release it as a film. And I could tell Brian even knows what we're talking about here. I saw it in the theater myself. I was also disappointed, but that was one of those last second things. Maybe Lucasfilm was hurting for cash that month. I don't know, but they put it out in theaters, and it was an aberration, though. It was an aberration from George's plan. I think he wanted to set the show up on a good start, but he still had his vision on TV. And I don't want to torture you guys with this, but I talked about how Genndy,
might as well.
Genndy was, trying to imagine. Lucasfilm had diversified in the 80s and 90s. If they had taken Gendy's suggestion, say, hey, we're going to do Star Wars, but we're also going to do like a How to Train Your Dragon type thing. We're also going to do launch these other things. I think Lucasfilm would have been in a better financial position in 2012. Mm-hmm. And that begs the question.
Like, I mean, a lot of like studios like work on other things outside of like their main big properties. So it is like odd that because what they made like Red Tails or whatever, like that was George Lucas's like last kind of film. I just think that they probably could have like been like a studio hired out to like do, other big directorial things. And I find it odd that just that wasn't really happening towards the end there. Same thing with like their whole games department. Like a lot of canceled games,
was
a lot
very
of things
dysfunctional
going forward. Yeah.
Yeah. They had a real fork in the road at that point with Filoni and Genndy. Genndy being the first choice because Genndy, he wanted to do Star Wars, but he wanted to do other things. He's in a lot of ways, Gendy's like George. They're both visionaries. They're both artists in their own right. They don't want to be held down. And so Genndy, he was going to expand and not just focus on Star Wars. And Filoni was the Star Wars guy. He was the alternative. Say, no, this is a guy who's hyper laser focused on Star Wars. He's like a fan in way beyond, Gendy's level of fandom. And so now basically what happens here. So I should say George is completely right that the future for any franchise at this point was in TV.
That's evident given what's going on today. Yeah.
He was just way too early. And that's what I mean with Underworld here. So like, if we talk about Underworld, the initial plan, interior rooms, we're doing interior shots, Godfather, Sopranos, adult level, no main characters on Coruscant. George gets involved with these big time writers and he starts saying to them, hey, we got some stories here. And they go, well, what's the limit? What are the limitations on this story? What can't I do? And George goes, there's no limits. Go, we'll do it. Just go for it. I mean, we're doing Star Wars here. So, and then he believed, ILM was making all these advancements. So he's like, we can do it. We can do it. You do the stories. We'll break the stories. And if we have great scripts, everything else will work. And if you look at
wasn't
George's
ILM
history,
still like doing stuff for other people and stuff like that? So it's so weird that Lucasfilm as a whole wouldn't be doing other things. It's just bizarre.
Well, ILM is working on. They're trying to do what Stargate Studios is doing. They're doing the same thing, and they just asked Stargate Studios like a little favor. Hey, could you do this? I'm sure they paid them, but could you do this little thing? We're going to shop it around. And what ends up happening is, Rick McCollum, this producer, he's like, George, you told me that we were going to be doing this show in these manageable ways, but now you want to do Coruscant and you want to be outside and you want to be, and that is a whole other ball game. And then, you go from a position where you say, we're not going to have main characters. And then you get to a position where George and Ronald Moore are talking out that 2-part episode about Darth Vader going down into the depths of Coruscant to squash a rebellion personally.
So is it supposed to be like kind of like an anthology type thing that just took place in the lower levels of Coruscant?
That's right. It's an anthology show. And George was super fascinated in the idea of doing a show that was like super crime focused. He was apparently interested in the Shadows of the Empire thing. So he was super interested in doing all this crime stuff. So he makes up these crime families, the Pikes, as invented for Underworld. And all this other stuff is invented for Underworld. And George's vision is that we're going to make the show first, the way you did Young Indy, the way you did Clone Wars. We're going to make it first, and then we're going to sell it to whoever wants to pick it up for distribution. And the plan was, we've got the scripts, we'll do the test footage, but the problem is when they're doing the test footage, it just costs so much to do this. I mean, it costs like, I don't know how much it costs to do this test footage, but I think it was in the millions.
And like easily, for sure. Like just like the amount of stuff that people get paid to like even to be like a camera operator, to give people like an idea of how much a camera operator would get paid like on a non-union job, would be like $13.50 as a day rate, and every hour over 12 hours you get paid your day rate every hour. So most shoots would go longer than a lot of shoots for like any big production usually go longer than 12 hours. So that's for one person as a camera operator. That's not including like catering, like, which is a whole other beast in and of itself, or like people who are like just the prop departments. Productions like this are incredibly expensive. So even this would probably cost millions upon millions of dollars to make.
It did, and they showed this footage to people who were interested. So they showed this to Sci-Fi Channel, hoping that they would. That's pick
an
up
interesting
the show.
One because Sci-Fi Channel at that point in time was not making good stuff.
Yeah,
no,
it would have been. It would have been for distribution, definitely not for creative consulting. But yeah, so they asked Sci-Fi Channel to do this. Yeah, there you go. At Sci-Fi Channel, one of the guys who was in that meeting actually a couple years ago on Twitter, he talked about that meeting, and he said the room was kind of divided because at that time you have to keep in mind that this is 2009, 2010. George does not have the best reputation at that point in time. The prequels are being crapped on every day online, and so the Crystal Skull had come out, the Clone Wars movie had come out. People are thinking that George is not who he is, and so on. And so there was more negative sentiment. It's quite a contrast. I mean, when Revenge of the Sith came out, that movie was like, there was a very different public sentiment about George in that movie, but like very positive. But things had changed by 2010, and so basically the Sci-Fi Channel boardroom or whatever, they like narrowly decided not to do it. And this other guy,
that is shocking.
This, by the way, you're Sergeant Marcus. You're right. Game of Thrones expensive, yes. And so that's part of this, is that the cost. George wanted to get the cost way down, and it was so expensive. I mean, these episodes would have been the most expensive pieces of television ever, easily, because he wanted it to look better than the prequels. And then you're doing an hour every week. I mean. So I mean, the movies, the prequels. Super quick,
just to give people like an idea of like an expensive television show, go watch like just the first episode of the original Flash TV show that came out in the 90s. That show looks like shit, and it would cost $1 million an episode. So to give you like an idea of like how expensive television production is, and streaming is like really what got like Game of Thrones its budget that it has now, because HBO is like, well, we have everyone's money, so we're just gonna produce something insane. But yeah, sorry, continue.
Yeah, no, that's right. I mean, George has these dreams. It's $50 million an episode. We're gonna bring it down to $2 million, but we just need some time to work on these live rendering technology and all this. So you show it to I think the cost scares these guys, but they show it to Sci-Fi Channel. And one of the guys in the boardroom goes, "I can't believe we just said no to Star Wars," but they say no. Then he shops it around to ABC, which is really Disney. And I don't remember exactly how they decided not to do that, but they decided no. And then I think ABC maybe felt that this is just not suitable for our family spot, because George wants to do like a rated R Star Wars with, like I said, there's going to be beheadings and bounty hunters and crime and rape and it's like, okay.
What were you saying, Tad?
I was gonna say and now ABC is like the show is like the channel with like all the shows where it's like teenage sluts in high school murdering people, stuff like that.
That's like CW. That was like how like they made their bread and butter
CW
for a long time. But like, I mean,
maybe
ABC,
I'm confusing them.
Yeah. ABC had a little bit of that going on, but like CW was like everything's like a set in a high school, and it's everyone's like drug deals are going down, like people having sex. Like,
right.
What high school did you people go to? Like, what the hell are you talking about?
Yeah, exactly.
Insane.
It's
Insane.
definitely for storytelling devices and not realism.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. I think so they go then to HBO, which is an interesting scenario. So HBO is interested in Underworld, but the problem with HBO is HBO wants creative control. And
I mean, I would have given it to him, honestly. I mean, it's HBO. Come on.
Right, but for George, that's just an immediate no, and then a period, and then the phone call ends. So it's just absolutely not. We're not going to give you creative control. So then they're kind of lost without a paddle. And what happens is they start looking into streaming. Now you have to keep in mind this is 2010. So they start looking into streaming and they start thinking, well, could we do a Star Wars channel or like a Star Wars streaming service that would just, you could subscribe.
Disney Plus is what you're describing.
Right,
Yeah.
right, exactly. You could subscribe, and then that's how we would fund. We would take a hit at first, but then we would fund the program through the subscriptions. And they decided that the infrastructure, if you think of high-speed internet in 2010, it's just not there. And there's a lot of problems.
Like 3 megabyte up and download.
Yeah.
Super bad internet.
So they decide maybe that's not the option. And then they think, well, what about a Netflix? That's just kind of, they're transitioning from the DVD rental service to the streaming. And so they're taking a look at that, and it's just too early. And so both Rick and George go, well, maybe we just have to wait on this one. We just have to wait. And so that's what they do. They start to wait. But George, he's not content to really just wait. So he has this idea, and this is the real tragedy. If you really want to know the secret of why Lucasfilm got sold, here you go. Buckle up.
Oh boy.
George had always wanted this ranch to be built, which was next to Skywalker Ranch. It would have been called Grady Ranch. And he wanted it to be, you guys have seen the volume. That's essentially along the lines of what George wanted to create. He wanted to create this big facility where you can shoot everything in Modesto County, or not Modesto, in Valley, like Valley Road, which is that whole Skywalker Ranch area. Just that whole Lucas Valley. We shoot everything here. We don't go to Australia like they were thinking. You don't go anywhere. We just do it all here. And he had wanted to do that for the prequels, but he wasn't able to get that ranch approved. And finally, gearing up for Underworld, he goes, here's how we're going to do it. We're going to bring the cost down by shooting like a volume type thing. We're going to do it all here. It's going to be a Grady Ranch. We're going to build it. There's one problem, is that Lucas's neighbors, who have turned down the proposals for like ever, continue to turn it down. Now, Lucas's neighbors are kind of these higher income, wealthy neighbors, and they felt
George
that,
Lucas,
I
shocking.
was gonna say.
Yeah, exactly. And they felt that this would bespoil the natural landscape, and they felt that there would be construction and there'd be traffic, and they didn't want this ranch. And so George tried really hard to get this going, and they just wouldn't allow it. And so finally it fell apart. In Lucasfilm, if you look back at the beginning of 2012, there's this really bitter statement from Lucasfilm, the company. I don't know how much of it came from George, but I'm sure a lot of it did, where the statement just kind of goes, we have tried and we don't understand how, but they continue to see us as an evil empire, and they won't allow us to do this. We don't see a solution that allows us to have a constructive relationship with our neighbors. And so is all this just really, and so they kind of have to accept that Underworld's just not going to happen, which sucks. And so you have to keep in mind, Underworld was the starting point. So in Celebration 3, George was asked on stage, hey, have you ever thought of doing a Knights of the Old Republic adaptation or Knights of the Old Republic show? And George goes, well, yeah, actually, because if Underworld works, then we've been looking at maybe doing things like that on the edges of the saga, live action shows that would be streamable like that. And
that hurts my spirit.
Right.
That hurts me deep down to my core.
Right. And so Underworld is that launch point. They had ideas for a Rebel TV show, not animated, but live action, a show covering the Rebels and how they get it going and how they get their groove. A show covering the
Galen
Empire.
Merrick was the one who basically helped found the Rebel Alliance. The
As long
dumbest
as it has
thing
the
from
Treaty
the
of
Force
Corellia, I'll be happy.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Garnbell
It's-
Iblis.
Maybe it'll make you feel happier to know that George saw The Force Unleashed as just a radical experiment. Definitely not what he was going to. But
that game's, I love it, but it's all over the place.
yeah, but the Empire, there was an idea for an Empire show. And George loved that idea because there was interest in doing something where we show that there are some people in the Empire who are maybe not so evil. They're further down on the lower rungs. And you'd see that in Underworld. There are these guys who work, maybe they're a dealer for the Empire. Maybe they work for these guys, but they just have a job to do. And maybe you have some rebels that aren't such great people. And so you have all this, the crime families, and it's a launching off point for everything. And so Underworld is the central focus of that whole TV dream that George said no to Gendy for this reason, right?
Yeah.
And so, you say no to Gendy, you stay this TV course. They're making the Clone Wars, but for not much, it's actually costing them some money to make that show. And so you have this TV future, and now it's kind of evaporated. You lose the chance to make the ranch. Nobody wants to get on board your projects, and it costs too much. It just costs too much right now. There's no way to get it out to people. And that's literally right at the time. This is 2011, 2012. Suddenly there's like some get together and Bob Iger's there. And I can't actually believe that this worked, but the audacity. As Bob Iger goes, George, you're getting close to retirement, you're getting up there. There's no heirs. Which is such a statement to make.
I'm just saying the snake on the fig tree.
Jesus. And then they talk about the fact, Iger kind of goes, there's this conversation about how, hey, remember Young Indy? We worked on Young Indy because you had a hard time getting the show out, and I remember helping you with that. Disney helped distribute that show. And so George is talking with him, and then one thing leads to another, and Iger goes, well, you ever thought about selling the company? Because we'd be interested. And they have a couple other people interested. Sony's interested. Microsoft is interested.
Microsoft, that was a weird one.
I know.
I don't know where the hell they would have gone with that. Microsoft, that one seemed off. Sony, I could kind of understand.
Yeah.
But Microsoft, what the fuck?
So with Microsoft, every other movie would be good.
All Xbox exclusive movies.
Oh yeah, they're all Xbox exclusive, and every other movie would be good because every other Windows version sucks.
Yeah. Windows 7, pretty
now,
solid.
I
want to
mention.
Miss me with that.
XP.
I want to mention, so you guys, I can sympathize. XP was pretty awesome. But you mentioned how Darth Maul, this whole thing later on with Crate. So initially at this time in 2011, 2012, George is, they're making 1313. They're trying to get the way going on Underworld, but it's kind of hit the blocks, so it's just stuck. And Clone Wars is going forward. And so at that time, they're making this Darth Maul game. And George suggests, hey, I like this Talon character. Why don't we do a thing with Talon and Maul? And they're like, well, Talon lives way after Maul. And he's like, that's okay. Just make Maul like a robot or a clone or something. Just do a game way out in the future.
Just do a Star Wars,
Just fucking do it.
Yeah.
By the way, I will tell
whatever.
You, a very funny anecdote is apparently those guys who were doing the Darth Maul thing, they're going in to talk with George, and they're briefing him like, all right, stick to the subject, talk about what you're doing. And then somebody for some reason goes, oh, don't mention Starkiller. Just don't mention it. No context. So, it actually, there's a separate time where they're working on Force Unleashed, and the team's told, when you talk about the character, talk about the Galen Merrick. Don't call him Starkiller. I don't think George was too fond of them calling him Starkiller, because that was an idea that George had for Luke way back when, and he got rid of it.
That's a very interesting comic book run, is the Star Wars, where it's like they adapted the original script. And it's like, I know that people say that it was like a Flash Gordon. That was how originally Star Wars was kind of meant to be taken. And damn, he really played into that with the Star Wars script. And they're Anakin Starkiller or Luke Starkiller, all these other changes that I am happy they made. I believe Han Solo was a big green lizard man originally.
There's a very funny anecdote about that. J.W. Rinsler, you guys probably know, he did the making of books. Awesome guy. Yeah. He did. So he and Randy Stradley had that idea to do this the Star Wars. And J.W. Rinzler brings it up to George because he found all this out when he was doing the making of. He's like, yeah, we could do the Star Wars. So he brings it up to George. George is like, no, I don't think. And so then so J.W. is like, oh no, and he tells these other guys that George said no, and they're like, oh well, that goes that, and there goes that, and J.W. Rinzler goes, no, wait, wait. Could you guys? And he talks to some of the art department, some of the guys at Dark Horse. He's like, just whip up some designs, anything you come up with, and so they do. Then J.W. Rinzler brings those sheets to George and puts them on his desk. A couple weeks later, George, what's that? Oh, this is for the Star Wars thing. Well, you said no. No, you should do it. So it's this whole thing where, visually, George is a visual man, and J.W. Rinzler knew that. So he's like, all right, let's put some pictures in front of George, and maybe he'll buy it.
God, it's such a funny way to they're like, here's a square, and this fits into this, like that kind of thought. I mean, like the Star Wars had like great artwork done for. I mean, a lot of the Dark Horse stuff did. Like, I think that a lot of that like new Disney stuff, like when Marvel first got the license back, some of the artwork in that was like truly atrocious. But like, this is a very, very quick plug for a convention that I'm helping to kind of wrangle together. Legends Con. Randy Stradley, the dude who was in charge of Dark Horse when they got the license for Star Wars, he's going to be at that convention doing like some Q&A stuff and stuff like that. And I want to pick that guy's brain and be like, what was it like when they're like, okay, this is being sold, Star Wars is going away from Dark Horse. So it's interesting that like they were that in touch with the people from Dark Horse, just make something really quick for George to look at. And they're like, all right, here's this facts. And they're like, okay, what do you think about this? Huh?
Well, if you ever talk with Randy, you could just ask him about Chewie. I'm sure he has a lot to say about that because he's the one who came up with the Vector Prime idea. Well, why don't we choose Chewie? Yeah, Randy. He's the one who.
Okay, dude, I'm hyped to talk to that dude. Like that's definitely gonna be. I'm a huge Dark Horse fan. Like in general, I was a big fan of the Hellboy comics and stuff like that. So I'm definitely excited to hear what he has to say. But damn, yeah.
Funny thing about that, by the way, yeah. Funny thing about that is that when they asked George, who could you kill in Vector Prime? First they said Luke, and George said, yeah, right.
Absolutely not. No.
No.
So George is kind of like, well, you can't kill the droids. And two other characters. Don't kill Luke, don't kill Leia. Good luck. You may notice there's a name missing from that little list. And so at that time, George was okay with axing Han. And one of the, I think it was the Del Rey editor, Shelley Shapiro, was just like, no, I won't be involved in this project if we kill Han. And that's where Randy goes, well, what about Chewie? And then the ball gets rolling, or the moon gets rolling.
I mean, that is a much more interesting plot line because of like the relationship that Han has with Anakin Solo after the fact. Like that's like such a gut wrenching like era of Star Wars. So I agree with that decision. It would have been, I mean, Chewbacca would have been bummed if Han died, but it wouldn't be like he wouldn't be treating Anakin Solo like shit. And yeah.
Well, imagine if that was flipped. Imagine if that was flipped, right? You have Chewie just, how you feeling today, Chewie? Grunt, groan, grunt, groan.
Yeah, it's exactly.
There's no room.
In Episode 7, when they kill Han, like Rey runs up to Leia and they hug, and Chewbacca just saunters off, like this dude he'd been friends with for 40 years, never even existed. He just walks off and he cries.
But you have a
life
corner. Debt too.
Yeah, I mean, technically he was kind of Han's slave to a certain extent. They were friends, like he treated him well. But yeah, like there's a stark juxtaposition between the way they handled both of those events.
Well, I don't know if the life debt is a thing in the new canon, but I know definitely in the expanded universe there was
the Han Solo movie. I think that they touch on that. The Han Solo movie is actually like pretty solid. It just didn't make any money because they fired the directors when 90% of the movie was like filmed and edited.
Made two movies.
Yeah, they fired him and then refilmed a bunch of the stuff. And the way that like Han is introduced to Chewbacca is, I mean, decently faithful to like some of the aspects of the EU. Like Han's in the Empire and he meets Chewbacca in prison. And there's a pretty funny scene between the two of them where Han speaks Shriwook to Chewbacca, and he's like, "Oh shit, you speak Shriwook?" And he's like, "Yeah, I learned a little bit of it, like like in Imperial training and stuff like that." So the Han Solo stuff is pretty solid. I'll say that's probably one of the better of the sequel movies that have come out. People praise Rogue One. I find it to be kind of boring up until Darth Vader shows up. It looks good, but yeah, that's neither here nor there. But yeah, Randy Stradley personally choked Chewbacca to death, is what you were saying.
right, exactly.
And then they killed off Anakin anyway, negating his entire sacrifice.
Well, but that whole thing, the whole thing with Chewie and then eventually Anakin, the Chewie thing, it's interesting. If you look at the structure of Vector Prime, it's just a tangent. Chewie dies in the novel right around the time that Obi-Wan dies in A New Hope. And he dies saving Luke. And then later on in that novel, Anakin's the one who discovers how to do that heat thing on Helska 4, which takes out the Vong. And so it's kind of like Luke saving the day. I mean, there's some similarities with the structure of A New Hope with that. It's kind of interesting.
Are you saying that it's like poetry? It rhymes?
It does rhyme. It does indeed. But yeah, so anyway, going back for a second to the Darth Maul deal with the game. So it's at that time he just suggests just spitballing, like, you should do a talent thing with Maul. And literally they tell him, we would have to set it after the movies because that's when talent is. He's like, okay, do whatever you want. Do whatever you have to do. And so then they do that. But here's the fascinating thing. So right at that time, he was actually planning on having Maul, who he'd already brought back, do some crime world stuff in Underworld, be a head of a crime organization. And
very similar to kind of what we got in the Clone Wars.
Yeah, and Iger's in his ear about, hey, ever think about selling the company? And Jet Lucas tells this really funny story about how, like, he was on the phone with his dad around this time. And he was like, hey, Dad, what you been up to? He's like, oh, I've been good. I've been all right. I've been writing. He's like, oh, what you been writing? He's like, I've been writing a sequel trilogy, the next episode 7. And Jet's like, what? No, because, his own son is like, but you told me that there was no episode 7. And George's like, well, so you think there's a story. But if we look at the story that George proposed, that he talks about in that archives book, he proposes a story where Darth Maul is the head of the criminal organization. Talon is there. And I get the sense it's right at this time that Underworld's going down, the Darth Maul's game. This is all germinating in his head. I think he's pulling from here. He's pulling from there. We know in the 1990s he was asked about the sequels, and he's asked about it so many times. He goes, no, there's no episode 7. Finally, they kept asking him, and he was like, well, listen, I'll put it this way. If I made a sequel trilogy, not only would it not be part of the saga, it would be like spin-offs with these characters, but I would have to invent it all. Like, I've never thought about any of the, like, there's nothing written, there's nothing planned, there's some vague ideas and nothing. And so Pablo Hidalgo a couple of years ago wrote and then deleted on Twitter that George he came up with the sequel treatments just to sell the company.
Oh, I thought you were going to say he made Star Wars Theory cry for like 6 months.
Maybe that's
sorry. I don't mean to take shots, but that was clearly a joke. Get over it, dude. Continue. Yeah. Sorry.
But yeah, no. So I mean, I actually believe Pablo on that one, that George did come up with the treatments to sweeten the deal, and but it's unfortunate. I think a lot of the deal is because the future that he had planned, this TV future, was just sort of going down in flames, and he was afraid that if he kept making stuff like Red Tails, if he made the museum, he was afraid that he was going to have to start firing people, and he didn't want to do that. And the irony, of course, is that when the company was sold to Disney, Disney did do layoffs. I think they laid off like a third, and then they shut down LucasArts. But one thing I want to mention about LucasArts, the 1313 deal, supposed to tie into Underworld. That's very interesting. So, I mean, everybody sort of saw the trailer and loved it, freaked out, thought it was awesome. And then, George did come to them and say, well, I want you to change it. Boba's the main character now. And they're like, what? But then they started to, they actually started working that out. And later on, the person who was leading that project said, we're actually really happy in hindsight, because even though that kind of messed with what we were doing, the fact that Boba has a jetpack, it makes this vertical gameplay, kind of like with Bounty Hunter. That
it's a lot more dynamic. Yeah.
Yeah. So you make a game that doesn't really exist yet. And so they felt, there's this really sad, heartbreaking, tragic letter that the leader of the 1313 team sent out this email to all the devs at the end. And it's amazing, because even though those of us on the outside don't see what he's talking about, you can definitely get a sense of what he's talking about from what he's saying. He's saying, everybody who came in to play test the game said that we had made the greatest Star Wars game ever made. And we feel, I speak for all of us, when we feel so proud of what we made here. We were turning the ship around at LucasArts, essentially. I mean, it was something very exciting that George was interested in, and that was going to tie into Underworld. But that was not canceled by George. That
is a bold claim, yeah.
Considering Jedi Academy exists.
I would agree. Jedi Academy is my personal favorite of all time.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to say, best game, but I'm sure if you're leading a dev team and you're close to it all the time,
of course, yeah.
But that's one of those things, unfortunately, that George didn't kill 1313. He didn't kill Underworld. These are things that the new ownership just decided not to pursue. And then they shut down LucasArts.
There's licensing issues too, isn't it?
Well, they worked all that out before they sold the company. So they spent months and months and months and months about going through all the thousands of licensing deals and just straightened it all out before they sold anything. But
I'm sure that actually did influence maybe some of the things that they were reprinting.
Well, I'm pretty sure that's why TCW was canceled, because they were on a direct competitor's network.
Yeah, I'm sure that probably influenced them quite a bit, until then they were like, well, we own it, so fuck it, we'll just put it on, because it was on Netflix. Because wasn't season 6 released on Netflix?
Yeah,
and then
it's interesting to think that if they hadn't canceled the show, you would have gotten the Yushin Vong arc that Filoni and Dave.
Yeah, I'm glad they did. I cheered the day they canceled it.
Wait, what? They were gonna make a Yushin Vong arc?
Yes.
Yeah, it's okay. Let me tell you about this. It's very interesting. I have to admit, I would have liked
this rabbit hole just goes deeper and deeper as we go along.
So basically,
grown even more, but for different reasons.
George was in the meeting room for NJO, and he was involved in shaping that story, and so he remembered that years later. Dave knows about it. Obviously, he was a fan of the EU, and so. There's actually a funny story,
but
yeah, Tad's like he's like, Dave does not care about the EU. I mean, I think it's possible for him to enjoy aspects of the expanded universe.
I could see him being a casual enjoyer, but not a
somebody
who is as invested.
Not an advocate for it, is what I would say.
It's actually kind of funny though, because when he was hired on to lead the Clone Wars show, he had read some of the novels. He had the encyclopedia, so that was one of the reasons he actually had issue with George saying that Ahsoka was Anakin's apprentice. He's like, but she's not in any of the books. She's not in the encyclopedias. What the hell are you talking about?
And it's ironic as time has gone on. She's the Iron Man of Star Wars now at this point. She's the one tying all the stuff together, and it's gonna culminate in their version of super quick. Tad, did you happen to watch the trailer for the Ahsoka show just out of morbid curiosity?
No, because I enjoy living underneath my expanded universe rock in peace and tranquility.
But I'll say this: there's a line in that trailer that I think is spectacularly hilarious. They're doing their whole shtick, and they're showing Ahsoka doing her stuff. They're kind of explaining the premise of the show, and they borderline look at the camera and go, "Thrawn will be the heir to the Empire." And I was like, boo. It's like, what? I was like, come on, man. I was like, I get what you're going for there, but that was the laziest form of fan service I've ever seen. You could have at least gone after Palpatine died, Thrawn was the only viable heir. Totally fine.
Yeah.
When it's like that, it's you're doing surgery with a ball peen hammer at that point. It's like, come on, man. Put a little bit more effort into this. That was my main takeaway from that trailer. It happens a 30, 40 second mark or whatever. And I was basically clocked out after that. I was like, okay. It's like, all right.
Yeah,
Jesus, come on, man.
I do remember seeing that. I saw the trailer for that, and yeah, he's very attached. I mean, I will say as an aside that it's very odd. When you kind of look into all these interviews and such, as I have sometimes done, you do notice trends, and some of them are disturbing. Like, I'm a huge fan of Return of the Jedi. I love that's
Same.
like my favorite. And so, you find these odd trends. JJ has these quotes where he talks about how he's like not on board conceptually Return of the Jedi. He doesn't accept Vader's turn. And then, you have, Ryan Johnson talking about how, Luke didn't really ever connect with Anakin, but he saw his father only as Vader, which, it's just kind of a rejection of the premise of Return of the Jedi. And then you have quotes from like even Lawrence Kasdan, who wrote the thing. He had some creative disagreements with George, and then eventually you get to Dave Filoni, where Filoni has these odd, I would call them odd opinions, where he sees Luke as a scarred and damaged character coming out of Return of the Jedi that's never really going to be able to be happy. He talks about how his journey is kind of like Frodo's, where he gave it all up for the struggle, and now, how do you go on? You can't have a wife, you can't have a family, you can't live a life that other people would live after Return of the Jedi, which is just not the impression that I get from that movie. But
you mean to tell me the very happy ending where everyone's dancing the chair and there's happy music, and Luke's looking at Leia and he's like, Then he looks over and sees his dead dad and Obi-Wan, and it's clearly a happy moment. You mean to tell me that you didn't think that was a bummer?
I just did it, and he's had these odd quotes lately where he's been saying stuff like, he talks about how he sees Ahsoka as the heir to Qui-Gon, in the sense that she, I previously would say Luke. Maybe,
he's gone full gray Jedi gray pill.
Yeah, but he sees Ahsoka.
Gray pill. Yeah. I love that, dude.
Gray pill.
As a gray Jedi hater, I'm taking that. I'm using that from now on in
You're
my
welcome.
regular dialect.
Gray pilled. Hashtag.
Kind of yes, because he basically, he says that Ahsoka is a kind of successor to Qui-Gon, because she, Qui-Gon trained Obi-Wan, who trained Anakin, who trained Ahsoka, and then Ahsoka is the one who sees beyond the errors of the Jedi ways, sees beyond the institutional problems, can lead.
She's so edgy and based,
and can sort of lead maybe a new continuation. And then he made some strange comments about how Ahsoka is the one that could possibly really get through to Vader, and I don't know.
Not his own flesh and blood, and his only connection to his dead wife, which is the whole reason why he's in this fucking mess.
Well, and actually, sadly, so the quotes where Filoni is saying all that about Luke and his future after Return of the Jedi, all those quotes are in a story conference in 2014 in Lucasfilm for the story group, what they're planning Last Jedi, and they're planning the Force Awakens. So I mean, it's one of those things where the more I hear him talk about Ahsoka, I kind of think he sees Ahsoka as like the way I would see Luke.
I mean, from that most recent Ahsoka trailer, it is evident. Like, this is like, I will be fully. I mentioned this like in a long form video that I put up on the channel. I think that they're going to be slotting Ahsoka into Luke's role in Heir to the Empire. And I will be officially 100% clocked out if that's the case. I'm not like some like salt farming, I'm not like some big hater of current Lucasfilm. That's definitely not how I am. But like, that's going way too far. Like, if you're going to just completely, because I get it, Mark Hamill is obviously a man who's much older than he would have been in this time period. Just recast Luke Skywalker. Get the dude that plays Winter Soldier. I don't give a shit. But do not put in Ahsoka. The whole point of Heir to the Empire was that Thrawn was trying to find his equivalent of the Jedi Order, which was clearly going to be rekindled by Luke Skywalker. We all know how Luke's order goes in the sequel trilogy. So if you just, Luke can't be doing that because he's off doing all the same mistakes that the Jedi did in the prequels by making Grogu make a strong, hard and fast choice. So we're going to put Ahsoka in this. No. I'm done. I'm not going to watch any more of this shit. Like and I'm not even a person who hates Ahsoka. I just don't think she needs to be mentioned as a fan theory for every single television show, for every single comic, for every single book. It's just too much. It's too much. And so if they just make her Luke in this, and if they put like a Jorah Sabayoth in this, and she's really worried about Ahsoka Tano, he's really worried about Ahsoka Tano, that makes no sense because Jorah Sabayoth wanted Luke because he's the son. It's clear that he's like the guy. He's the chosen one. So I'll just put that out there.
Well,
Ahsoka's the new chosen one. So
I mean, if you look at the way they write her, that is clearly the case. They go so far as to introduce time travel to Star Wars to stop her from being killed by Darth Vader in Rebels.
Well, you know,
I don't need more than that.
I don't hate the character or anything, but I do sympathize. I think in response to all that, I have just 2 sentences. That boy is our last hope. No, there is another. Ahsoka Tano.
No, it's Leia, goddammit. I will always choose to believe it's Leia.
I mean, it's clearly Leia, 100%. Like, that's obviously but like, I could see that being a justification for, God, and I hate, like, I don't want to be the dude who just, like, hates on Dave Filoni. The dude seems totally fine. Like, he seems like a nice guy. He seems to really care about the version of Star Wars that he's built up. And some of that's probably just because I'm a jaded, older fan of Star Wars, and maybe this just isn't for me. Yeah, no, whatever. But like, come on, man! Like, just like the whole edict from all of the writers post the Disney buyout that Luke was clearly never going to have a happy ending. He was literally given a happy ending at the end of the original trilogy. Like, it's not that hard to follow that train of thought. It's it's insane.
This is why I'm glad I come on your streams every now and then, because it justifies my aversion to the new canon every time I hear you speak about it, and it makes me so much comfier living underneath my little rock. I don't know what I'm missing out on, but I'm glad I have everything I love under here. It's great.
There's definitely some bright spots in current canon stuff, but it feels like they're getting fewer and fewer and fewer. I will say, if they build up the Ahsoka show to be that Heir of the Empire will be a movie and Luke will be heavily involved, and the Luke's New Jedi Order maybe is already like a little bit established because at that point in time it already exists on Ossus. If they do that, I'll check it out and watch it. But if they come up with like Luke he's just too busy to deal with Thrawn, like the apparent heir to the Empire, as you've made obvious in the trailer of the show, I think that at that point you're just going to make more people upset than they already were. And I'm not saying that Lucasfilm should make all their decisions based off of Neckbeard's opinions on Twitter, because I often neglect their opinions as well, because some of them are very like unnecessarily fan servicey. Like, I've seen some people putting out shit that I'm like, dude, it just reads like a fan film. And if you want a fan film, go make one at that point.
Yeah.
But but I will say there's bright spots, and I don't mean to be like too much of like a Disney hater, but I'm also definitely not a Disney apologist by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah. No, I hear you. I mean, I think, again, George would have had her dead at the end of Revenge of the Sith.
It would have been interesting to watch Anakin kill her. Like, wouldn't that have been like?
Yeah,
he's
and
choosing
I don't know
his wife over essentially his daughter. Like, come on, that's inherently an interesting plot point.
Yes, and there was an ending set up that they set up for themselves with that ending, with Darth Vader doing that, and then it was undone. Maybe that came from above. I have no idea, but yeah, you know. I hear you on the Ahsoka stuff, but I did kind of want to get back to this Vong thing because it's so fascinating to me.
Oh, yeah. So, like, they were going to do a Vong arc in TCW?
Right. So, this is very interesting. So, you know, in 2015 at Tribeca Film Festival, George mentioned that, you know, this famous quote everybody brings up, that the sequels concern themselves with the grandkids of Anakin, and that there's no secret to anyone because it's in the books and everything. And I'm very confident that he's referring to the New Jedi Order because that's what he was involved with. He wasn't involved with Legacy of the Force or Fate of the Jedi.
He's the most aware of the New Jedi Order. Yeah.
Yeah. He had conversations about it. He reviewed outlines about it, and so on and so forth. So he remembered something, and then Filoni knows about the Vong. He did some sketches for this show that show a Yusha Vong ship and Yusha Vong character. He got it all pretty accurate, and so, and Filoni actually seemed pretty excited, pretty stoked to share this when they shared it at one of the panels. That this was an idea that Filoni, I presume Filoni brought it up to George. I don't think it would have been the other way around. So Filoni brought this to George's attention, and then I guess they decided to do this. What the episodes would have been is it would have been kind of an X-Files-y type of alien abduction story where it's just a self-contained story. You just have 2 or 3 episodes where our heroes or whoever cast of characters we're following, they're on the outer reaches of space, and they sort of they run into this what the heck type of situation, and it's with the Yushin Vong, and I've heard it's like an alien abduction story. I think these scripts were written but have never come out, and so the Vong would have been tangentially involved. I guess it was like a scout or something, would have been scouting. Wouldn't have addressed much about them. I think they would have mostly kept mysterious. As for, sometimes people bring up the Force thing. The tricky thing with that, and it's kind of spoilers for NJO here, but
for this 20-year-old series.
Yeah,
it is.
Dude, that's crazy to think about. That series can almost legally drink.
Yeah,
think about that.
I'm so used to that Star Wars EU server. I spoiler tag, but yeah, no, I mean, essentially, the end of that series, we find out that the Vong had been Force sensitive, and it had been something that is tragically disconnected from their species due to their misadventures in their home galaxy. And so I think there might have been a way to make it work, even if there was some, you have to squint at it sideways, but I would have been fascinated. Then again, maybe it would have been atrocious and I would have hated it. You never know, but yeah.
But not to cut the conversation too short here, but we've been going, originally I was this always happens. I always tell my wife, okay, well, I'm going to stream with Tad. We're going to talk for maybe we'll do an hour. That's
it's never
absolutely never the case. I don't know why I even say it, because every time I get done, she's upstairs with her arms crossed. She's like,
and then I enjoy talking to you so much that I'll have a game night or something with my friends, and they're like, hey, we're supposed to start an hour and 15 minutes ago. Or I'm in this case, I got to get up for work in the morning.
Whoops. But so, I mean, I loved this conversation, and I love all this insight that you have, X. Let's, just for the people who are watching, would you guys be interested in doing this again sometime soon?
Oh, absolutely. It's been an absolute treat.
X, what are your opinions? What are your takes? You excited to come back?
Yeah, I think it'd be fun. It's fun to talk this stuff and just shoot the breeze about Star Wars and some of these very interesting, like you said, rabbit holes. They absolutely are.
I feel like
Underworld is one of those mysterious things.
Let's say next stream, I want to dive more into that Young Jedi Knight stuff, and maybe we can chit chat to that off stream and stuff like that. But my set, I'm sorry to cause you so much pain here, buddy. But yeah, anything that you guys want to plug here really quick before we come to a close.
I mean, I've got
a new video out.
I do. I released a video last week. One of my Patreon folks wanted me to redo one of my older videos I did on General Grievous, so I did it in my updated style, and I also made it longer and added more facts in it as well. And
didn't that one have a bunch of copyright issues that you had to take care of?
Yeah, so it was supposed to originally publish last month, but while I was doing it, it was copyright flagging because I used some clips from the OG Clone Wars in it. And these are clips I've used several times in other videos on both of my channels, and have never had an issue. However, there was one issue with one of my Clone Wars videos on my other channel where that got flagged, and I disputed it, and it ended up being fine. So that dispute got waived. So I did the same thing with this one, and instead of getting to me within 2 to 3 weeks like they normally do, I had to wait a full month for it to be waived. So that's why it's so late. And right now I'm working on another commission video, and I'm pretty much just doing commission videos. I should have been doing a short because I like to do Mandalore Microfact Mondays, where I post my shorts. The last short I tried to make was too long, so because I'm a very long-winded explanation person.
What? You? No.
So I have to workshop that and re-record it, and it's just a whole pain in the butt. There's one day a month I'm usually able to record, and I'll usually do my videos for that. So yeah, that's my long-winded way of saying I'm working on stuff. Don't know when it's coming out, but it will.
And then
I am working on different things.
You plug.
Yeah, so I'm working on things. There are 2 big projects I'm working on that I work on them sort of when I get a chance, because like everyone, I also do other stuff. I have a life and all that. But when it comes to Star Wars, I have some of the behind the scenes things I'm working on for like a bigger project that'll be out on YouTube. And then there's another project which I'm pretty excited about, which is I haven't really announced, but some of these infographics things are they'll be coming. And so Shadows of the Empire, Handothron, they'll be the next ones out with George. And we could maybe talk more about that in the future, but how George was involved in that era. I do have a little gift for you to add, since you mentioned Grievous. And I think really? I know where your sentiments lay on this. So I was doing some research the other day, and much to my shock and surprise, and I'll be sharing this in the future on the Star Wars EU subreddit, I come across a couple old videos with Lucino talking about Grievous, and talking about how he had a partner that he was working with closely in shaping Grievous's backstory for Labyrinth of Evil. And that backstory, went back and forth with his partner. Is very mutually agreed upon thing that they both felt comfortable with, and that partner's name was George Lucas.
Oh, so really?
It's very surprising information to me, but it's true that Lucas was the one who helped flesh out Grievous's backstory for.
So that's interesting. That's interesting because they change it quite a bit in.
They do.
In
they do.
Later media. There's actually one of a.
Tad, do you mean to tell me that sometimes George Lucas changed his mind?
Yeah, I know. It's like being surprised that water's wet.
Yeah.
But it's surprising that we went from this totally capable Jedi killer, and then who was a victim of this shuttle crash and was given a difficult choice between dying a dishonorable way or serving this new government as leading these what he viewed as inferior droid warriors, to basically being sad that he couldn't be a Jedi, so he went and had his brain stem torn out and put into a robot body so he could be as much of a Jedi as he could. Kind of like somebody commented on my video, kind of like a syndrome from the Incredibles, but if he wanted to be a Jedi instead of a superhero.
Oh yeah.
Which I
but all these years
comparison.
All these years, Filoni has addressed the difference, and all these years Filoni has said, well, it's true he had this other story, but I know what George told me. And this is the first time I heard an interview with Lucino going, well, they're doing that show, but I know what George told me. So we hear the other side of this interesting situation.
I have a whole 2 video series, series about me speculating what actually was Filoni, what actually was George. It's all speculation, of course, because it's all he said, she said, more Dave said, but Dave said, George said, really. But,
so what you're saying is we crowdfund a cage match between James Lucino and Dave Filoni, and whoever wins definitively was the one that got the advice from George Lucas.
Well, I am so glad you said that.
Contest.
I am so glad. No, it absolutely should be a cage match, because I am so glad you said that, because one of the funniest things that Joe and I have joked about is that if you look back at the Celebration, oh God, this is probably Celebration 2012 or something, Lucino is there and the man is ripped. He is shredded. Yes.
I gotta.
It is true.
We're done.
I mean,
No,
I've
it's
seen,
not.
I've seen
You're
pictures
gonna
of him.
find
He
it on
just seemed like
Google,
a
but
little
it's
bald
true.
guy with a mustache.
No, he's not. He's not little. This. I mean, actually, I have to tell you, Lucino's an absolute badass. I mean,
I've only ever seen him sitting down, so
the guy is crazy. I mean, it's absolutely nuts. I mean, he went down and he's like, he has these. He talks about how he like machete cut his way through the Yucatan Peninsula to get to like Tikal, which is the Mayan temple that they shot Yavin for. It's like,
what the
this
fuck?
is a man. I mean, he's an absolute hardcore. After he did Unifying Force, he built a thatch straw hut in the Yucatan Peninsula, just lived there. He traveled the world with Brian Daly, and they found, I think they came down from the Himalayas, and like they had to use like Telegram to find out that Brian Daly had been approved to do the radio drama. It's just insanity. I mean, this guy is like...
Now are you going to tell me he wrote Darth Plagueis while in a submarine in the Marianas Trench?
He's James
I would not
Cameron
be surprised at all. I would really not be surprised, because this is a guy who like
Buck Wild.
He has the craziest stories. He used to play bass in these rock bands, and then he's exploring the world. And he talks about how he saw. Yeah, I know, right? He talks about how he saw Star Wars in theater with Brian Daly, and they were both like high out of their minds going into the film.
I feel like I've heard some anecdotes about that exact same thing about Jay. Yeah. But I mean, I don't really have anything to plug for my own channel, but yeah, I'll put in the link dump. X, are you okay with me posting maybe your Reddit account so people can go through and see all your post infographics, or do you have weird stuff on there you don't want people to see?
Hide your porn.
No, post it.
Yeah.
Go ahead, post it. There's actually a pin post at the top which has all the stuff I've done.
Oh, I thought you were gonna say no porn on this account, but okay. So I'll post your stuff in there, and I'll post your YouTube channel in there as well, so people can go and check out this video for themselves. But yeah, we'll get together and do all this stuff again. This was an absolute pleasure. Thank you guys so much for coming on. Appreciate you so much. And then, as I always say, make sure everybody in the audience sticks around for the outro song. It's an absolute bop. It's a banger. But until next time, love you boys. Appreciate you.